Chapter 45-28. Fairy Xingyu's mouth was filled with a sweet fragrance that was comparable to the sweetness of the flower realm. Her languid voice was a little greasy, and her eyes were moist. She looked at Xueqi and said in a low voice, You can actually say such shameful things. I thought you were like heavenly thunder, only upright and cold. I still remember you carefully burying the withered flower in the soil with heartache. I also remember you saying that when we came back, we would go and see the new flower together. However, it's been a long time since then. Even if there were more than 10 flowers, they would have withered, let alone one. Don't worry, Xueqi. I've already seen it. The flowers have grown again. The flowers are different, but my feelings are still the same. Fairy Xingyu was a little flustered. She hurriedly said, as if she was confessing her feelings. Yes. Xueqi did not show his appearance. He only said in the silver light, There are many female cultivators who love flowers, but I've never seen a female cultivator who buried flowers. Xingyue, although you are strong, bad-tempered, unyielding in your words, and even have many schemes in your heart, just seeing you bury flowers is like seeing a real Xingyue. I think you may be the person I should meet in this life. Humph. Fairy Xingyu pouted and said with a smile, Have you met many female cultivators? I thought your story of burying flowers was already a very sad and beautiful story. But looking at Xiaohua now, I seem to see an even more sad and beautiful picture. I think Xiaohua is also a person with a story in his heart. Xueqi did not know whether he was intentional or not, but he brought the topic to Xiaohua again. Xingyue Fairy seemed unwilling to break the sweetness at this time. She also nodded and said, You're right. According to the records in the Hall of Heroes, Xiaohua doesn't have a dual cultivation partner. This makes me feel very strange. Xueqi immediately thought of Jiuxia, who was mentioned by Xiaohua. He was about to speak, but he felt that it was inappropriate, so he did not continue. Fairy Xingyu said again, However, it is said that he met a female cultivator named Li Jing at the Jade Pavilion conference. Later, the two of them traveled together for a while and went their separate ways. Oh, and at this point, Fairy Xingyu actually looked around, lowered her voice, and said with a smile, I also have an extremely secret news. Xiaohua seems to have colluded with the 9th princess of immortal Emperor Go Chen. How is that possible? Xueqi scoffed without even thinking about it. I'm afraid you're just guessing. Darling Su, you must trust the intuition of a female cultivator. Fairy Xingyue said with a smile, Although there is no such news in the world, I can still see some clues from the time when Xiaohua disappeared and the place and time when the new princess appeared. What's more, didn't you see that the flying boat that Xiaohua just used is the Heavenly Court's immortal imperial equipment? If Xiaohua doesn't understand the 5-cheese unification technique, how can he activate it? This has nothing to do with the new princess, right? Xueqi smiled bitterly. Fairy Xingyue blinked mischievously and said with a smile, How about I tell him the news that the new princess has been suppressed and see his reaction? If there is no Confucian family here, you can just say it. Xueqi warned, If you say it in front of them, won't you be causing trouble for Xingyue? I know. Fairy Xingyue said with a smile, I'll just send a voice transmission at this point. Fairy Xingyue's smile slowly disappeared. She looked into the distance and said, The Dongfang family really can't hold back anymore. Dongfang Yushan has gone to find Xiaohua. Xingyue. Xueqi suddenly said, Let's not talk about these mundane things. I remember the last time you came to the flower realm, putting aside the fact that the two immortals were greatly moved by the fragmented space, Dongfang Yushan moved his body and landed beside Xiaohua. He looked at the muddy water on the flower path and frowned slightly. He gritted his teeth and hesitated again. At this time, Xiaohua's voice rang out, You are a disciple of the Dongfang family, right? Why are you looking for me? Dongfang Yushan was overjoyed. He was afraid that Xiaohua would ignore him, so he hurriedly bowed and said, I am Dongfang Yushan, a direct descendant of the Dongfang family. I deserve to die for disturbing seniors flower viewing, Xiaohua replied indifferently. Since you already know, why bother coming over? To tell you the truth, I'm also a person of culture. Whenever I see beautiful scenery, I'll linger on it. Dongfeng Yushan said with a smile. However, I have a question today. If I don't ask Senior, it'll be like a fishbone stuck in my throat. I'll turn a deaf ear to the beautiful scenery in front of me. You're talking about the cultivation method of the 5 Qis unification, right? Xiaohua replied, hitting the nail on the head. Yes, yes. Dongfeng Yushan didn't expect Xiaohua to be so straightforward. He didn't hide anything at all. When he answered, even his voice trembled a little. Senior, I have the cultivation method of the 5 Qis unification. Xiaohua didn't deny it. Instead, he answered truthfully, however, this cultivation method belongs to a good friend of mine. I've only received some guidance from him, and without his approval, I can't tell anyone about this cultivation method. Then, who is Senior's good friend? Where is he? Dongfeng Yushan hurriedly asked. My good friend is called Wen Shu. Xiaohua smiled. As for where he is, that's not something I can know. However, when I return to the hidden immortal mainland, I'm sure he'll hear the news and go to the soaring Dragon Mountain range to find me. That's good. That's good. Dongfeng Yushan smiled. To be honest, the cultivation method of the 5 Qis unification has been lost for a long time. Not to mention the Immortal Palace, even the 4 great families don't have the complete cultivation method. If Senior's good friend can teach the cultivation method of the 5 Qis unification to the 4 great families, when Xiaohua heard this, he immediately waved his hand and said, You don't have to tell me about this. Just look for Wen Shu in the future. Yes, yes. Dongfeng Yushan nodded like a chick pecking at rice. I know. What I want to say is that I've already discussed it with the other 3 great families. After your trip to the Star Moon Palace, you must come. Oh, no. After we arrive at the Star Moon Palace, we'll definitely ask the family head to send an envoy to invite Senior to the 4 great families. Moreover, if it's possible, I hope that Senior will first accept the invitation from the Dongfeng family. As he spoke, Dongfeng Yushan carefully took out an exquisite square jade piece and respectfully handed it over. This jade piece was in the shape of a bamboo flower. Every fine line on the bamboo flower was carved with exquisite skill. Under the sunlight, the color of the surrounding flowers was reflected. This jade piece was actually similar to the bamboo flower. Moreover, Xiaohua had no doubt that as long as he activated his true qi and let it fall on this jade piece, this bamboo flower might slowly bloom. Unfortunately, Xiaohua was curious and also self-aware. He was just thinking about Xian from the Immortal Palace. How could he accept the Dongfeng family's bamboo flower first? Moreover, not to mention that this bamboo flower was ugly, to send flowers, no matter what, he had to find a female cultivator who was more beautiful than the flowers, more beautiful than the jade, right? How could Xiaohua dare to accept a flower sent by a man? Xiaohua smiled slightly and did not turn around. Instead, he continued to look at the sea of flowers in the distance and said, I've just killed thousands of immortal beasts and am now using the scenery here to cleanse my mortal heart and murderous nature. Let's talk about these mortal matters later. Yes, this junior understands. Dongfeng Yushan was already prepared for Xiaohua's rejection. He didn't think that a supreme grandmaster like him had the right to invite a grand ascension stage human being to the Dongfeng family, so he stowed the invitation card away up his sleeve before bidding farewell to Xiaohua and departing. Not only did Dongfeng Yushan's actions fall into the eyes of Fairy Xingyu and Shimin Hingyue, but in all fairness, even if they were the ones to go forward, they would also seek greater benefits for their sections. However, they were still relieved that Xiaohua didn't accept the invitation. There was naturally no day or night in the spatial fragment. The sky was neither dark nor dim, and was always so gentle. The entire flower realm was like a huge flower bud, sweet and tranquil. No one knew what the others were thinking, but Xiaohua was minding his own business as he walked through the muddy flower path. He looked very leisurely and at ease. If he were to change into a white scholarly robe, he would look like a distinguished scholar. In particular, Xiaohua's temperament had undergone an indescribable change after peeking into the inheritance of Qingqiu Mountain. He involuntarily exuded the aura of spring amidst the myriad of colors. It was rare for a scholarly family to have a few women, so they would occasionally steal glances at his elegant and distinguished figure from the corner of their eyes. The flower realm wasn't all drizzling. After a few hours, there was wind again. The wind was a little tipsy and blew through the air, either sweeping up some of the flowers or mixing in some of the earth's fragrance. His nose and mouth were a little moist, and the ground beneath his feet was already solid. Looking at the ground in the distance, the flowers were completely translucent with droplets of water. The wind swayed the branches of the flowers, and the droplets of water either fell or slowly evaporated. Wisps of mist had appeared in the flower realm at some point in time. The wind wasn't strong, so it couldn't blow the mist away. Instead, it swept the mist away and gradually dispersed it. The mist was also strange. It didn't fly too high and only covered the flowers. If it was a foot higher, the mist would dissipate. Seeing the mist cover the delicate features of the flowers like a veil, revealing a kind of hazy beauty, Xiaohua was intoxicated. Such a beautiful scene should only exist in the heavens. He didn't know when it would descend to the mortal world. After another few hours, the mist gradually grew thicker. The clouds in the sky seemed to be jealous of the delicate features of the flowers. They tore apart and fell down, filling up the entire world and covering everyone's eyes. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just as Xiaohua was pondering what other scenery there was, the sound of rain falling could be heard. First, the raindrops were like stars, drop by drop. Soon after, the raindrops were like threads, entwining endlessly. In the end, the curtain of rain was like a waterfall, pouring down with a ladle. Chapter 45-29. Xiaohua was naturally not afraid of the rain. He squatted down and looked at the nameless orange-red flowers in front of him. These flowers first swayed gently when the rain fell, as if they could not bear the burden. When the rain became heavier, the branches of the flowers also tilted, but the branches seemed to be resisting, straightening from time to time. However, the petals also began to fall. The heavy rain fell like a torrent, splashing loudly. The entire branch of the flowers had completely fallen. The flowers in the rain were very miserable. The petals fell one by one, and the whole ground was covered in fallen petals. The petals floated gloomily in the watery water. How could they be as bright as before? People's hearts always change. There will always be a time when it blooms. Xiaohua's heart felt a little strange. He looked at the sky and wanted to disperse the rain clouds, but after a moment, he sighed and let out a low groan. With a sway of his body, he landed on the flying boat again. Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu were both satisfied and did not care about the rain. The two of them seemed to be holding hands. Xiaohua turned around and let go. Xiaohua smiled slightly. Just as he was about to speak, he saw that Xueqi's body was still covered in silver light. His heart sank unconsciously. He frowned and said, "Senior, what about your physical body? Didn't you say that there will always be a time when it blooms?" "There's always a time for flowering," Xueqi said calmly. "It's time for me to change my physical body. Don't worry." "That's good." Xueqi had actually said this before. Xiaohua nodded slightly and said, "According to the Buddhist sect, the physical body is a bag of skin. It's the most burdensome." That's what the Buddhist sect said. It's completely opposite to the path of our Tao sect. Fairy Xingyu said disdainfully, "Try not to change your physical body. I'm afraid you can't even ascend to the immortal world." Of course, Xiaohua was not here to discuss cultivation with Fairy Xingyu. He smiled and looked at Xueqi, saying, "Senior, how did you meet the family of Confucian cultivators?" Xueqi didn't hide anything and told him the whole story. In fact, it was similar to what Xiaohua had thought. While Xiaohua was cleaning up the Yiqiong heavenly residence, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu had gone to investigate the exit of the spatial fragment. At the same time, they had also investigated the whereabouts of the flying crane immortal beast. Because their strength was greatly reduced, They were very careful and did not dare to follow the flying crane immortal beast too obviously. Moreover, Fairy Xingyu could not use her star shuttle and had to rely on other secret techniques to find the meteor belt. Therefore, they spent a lot of time in the spatial fragment. Of course, because the exit of the spatial fragment was blocked by the restriction of the Yecheong Heavenly Mansion, Fairy Xingyu's efforts were destined to be fruitless. However, right when they were feeling dejected, they noticed to their shock that there were numerous flying crane immortal beasts residing in a valley that was extremely far away from the Yecheong Heavenly Mansion. There were so many that Xueqi did not dare to investigate carefully. He immediately wanted to take Fairy Xingyu back to the heavenly abode. The two of them were rather secretive, and the flying crane immortal beast did not discover them. However, the two of them had only flown for 100 kilometers when the valley became lively again. Xueqi released his extended thought and was surprised to find that the disciples of the four great clans and some other Confucian clans had actually bumped into the flying crane immortal beast's warning area. The two of them wanted to go back and save them, but they saw that there were too many disciples of the Confucian clans. It was not something they could save, so the two of them were ready to give up. At this time, the disciples of the Dongfang family actually took out their immortal imperial equipment. The immortal imperial equipment of the heavenly court was somewhat different from the immortal world's immortal equipment. The true qi of the hidden immortal continent could barely be used. Moreover, the immortal imperial equipment could also be used in the immortal world fragment. Seeing this, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu naturally had to go back and save them. However, even if the two of them rescued many disciples of the Confucian clans and used their immortal imperial equipment to escape from the valley where the flying crane immortal beast was, they had successfully lured thousands of flying crane immortal beasts out. In the absence of an exit, Xueqi had no other place to escape. He could only rush back to the Yecheong Heavenly Mansion and bring Xiaohua along. Naturally, they did not expect that they would meet Xiaohua, the immortal Xiaohua, who was good at creating miracles. Before they could see the shadow of the Yecheong Heavenly Mansion, the entire immortal world fragment shook. Then, a strong restriction fluctuation rushed out from the Heavenly Mansion. Of course, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu knew that there was a change in the Yecheong Heavenly Mansion. They were overjoyed. As long as the restriction of the Heavenly Mansion was triggered, they could hide in the Heavenly Mansion. Naturally, they would not be afraid of the flying crane immortal beast's attack. Unfortunately, their joy was that they were too close to leaving the Heavenly Mansion. When they saw the Heavenly Mansion, the shadow of the starry sky, and the meteor belt, they knew that the door of life had been opened for them. Unfortunately, in order to save the disciples of the Confucian clans, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu had used too much immortal spirit qi. They could not rely on their physical bodies to absorb immortal spirit qi from the space fragment. When they saw hope, they were already at the end of their rope. At that time, even if Xueqi did not go down to save Xiaohua, he would definitely not be able to hold on until he used the immortal imperial equipment to fly into the meteor belt. Fortunately, Xueqi sacrificed his physical body to bring Xiaohua onto the flying ship. Xiaohua, who was good at creating miracles, naturally brought the immortal imperial equipment to the flower realm. Sigh, it's too dangerous. Xiaohua sighed. He knew that this fragment of the immortal world was different from the ruins. Even if he did not hide his cultivation base and use the forbidden power of the immortal world as a soul cultivator and sent out his clones, he was afraid that he would not be a match for the flying crane immortal beast. Of course, Reverend Yun's Panga axe could be effective. Unfortunately, Yun only had the strength of one axe. Not to mention that he had not fully recovered, Reverend Yun could not resist thousands of flying crane immortal beasts. Xueqi heard and said faintly, "The flying crane immortal beast is a famous ferocious beast in the immortal world. Only a vitality-gathering immortal can defeat it." Speaking of vitality-gathering immortal, Xueqi realized that he had let the cat out of the bag. He hurriedly covered it up and said, "Even if there were 10 of you at the Mahayana realm, you would not be a match for thousands of flying crane immortal beasts." Yes, I know. Xiaohua nodded and said with a smile, I just feel a little guilty that I did not do anything. Didn't you kill a flying crane immortal beast in the heavens abode? Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, could it be that you're still hiding your strength? Well, I do have some. Xiaohua could not bear to see Xueqi like this and confessed. Unexpectedly, Xueqi interrupted Xiaohua and said, that's because I don't allow you to use it. You don't have to blame yourself. All right. Seeing this, Fairy Xingyu straightened up and stretched. She said with a smile, if you don't want me to say it, then I won't say it. However, this trip to the Star Moon Palace is really unfavorable. We haven't even flown out of the meteor belt, and we've already encountered so many dangers. I think it's a good thing. Xueqi said, in the future, if we don't come to the Star Moon Palace, the disciples of the 3 continents will also have scruples and not dare to come in casually. Moreover, if we don't pass through the space fragments of the immortal realm, how can we come to the flower realm? The first time we entered the Star Moon Palace, we were lucky enough to enter the flower realm. The last time we entered the Star Moon Palace, we entered the flower realm again. This kind of opportunity is really rare. Fairy Xingyu smiled sweetly and did not say much. At this time, silence spoke louder than words. Seeing that the rain was gradually getting lighter, Xiaohua pointed at the meteor belt and asked, Fairy, where should we go now? I don't know either. I'll follow your arrangements. Fairy Xingyu said lazily, the meteor belt is changing. The last time we went out of the flower realm, we fell into a pillar-shaped space fragment. This time, there is no pillar-shaped space fragment in this meteor belt. How would I know where to go? You can see the turbulence in the realm, and we have the immortal imperial equipment under us. Everything is ready, so I don't have to worry. All right. Xiaohua nodded. He forced himself to open the delusion breaker eye for a moment, then pointed at the curve-like space fragment and said, then we'll fly to that space fragment. Then, Xiaohua sent a voice transmission to Dongfang Yushan and the other disciples of the Confucian aristocratic family to return to the flying boat. He did not discuss with them and activated the flying boat again. At this time, the rain in the flower realm suddenly stopped and the clouds dispersed. Inexplicable light sprinkled down again, and the broken flower branches tenaciously stretched out again. Little bits of colorful light once again emerged from the ground. In the colorful light, hundreds of millions of flower buds protruded out. Presumably, it would not be long before the entire flower realm would be a world of flowers again. However, Xiaohua did not have time to take another look at this splendid new world. He had already activated the flying boat and left this world that was one of the few worlds that Xiaohua had not plundered. The beautiful scenery of the past few hours had turned into a permanent memory in his heart. Perhaps he would come again at some point in time. However, he probably would not be alone to admire the scenery. He would probably bring along a confidant to spend such a beautiful time with him. The curved-like space fragment looked very close, but after activating the flying boat, they actually flew for more than an hour before arriving. After rushing into the halo of the space fragment, what hung above Xiaohua and the others was a barren continent. There were some strange beasts on this continent, as well as some innate restrictions. Xiaohua even sensed a familiar primordial wave on this continent. Needless to say, this continent was a lost corner of the primordial world. Of course, this primordial world was only a fragment and could not be compared to the previous divine land ruins. The strange beasts inside were only about the 5th grade origin energy. Xiaohua did not need to do anything. As long as some disciples of the 4 aristocratic families acted, they could drive these strange beasts away. On the primordial world fragment, Xiaohua's divine telekinesis was also useful. Therefore, it was not too troublesome for Xiaohua to find the exit of the space fragment. Moreover, when he faced the meteor belt again, Xiaohua was already more cautious. The first immortal world fragment to enter was a hexagonal plane fragment. Then, the flower boundary was a triangular 3-dimensional fragment. Now, the primordial world fragment they were in was a curve. Therefore, Xiaohua already had a feeling that whether the interface's level was high or not was reflected in the shape of the fragment. Perhaps, the higher the level of the interface, the simpler the fragment shape would be. On the other hand, the lower the level of the interface, the more complicated the fragment shape would be. Therefore, when Xiaohua was selecting a space fragment, he intentionally looked for three-dimensional fragments. Even if there were no safe three-dimensional fragments, he would rather look for simple linear fragments. If there were no three-dimensional fragments, Xiaohua might as well wait. In any case, Xiaohua did not want to go to a space like the immortal world fragment again. Chapter 45-30. Sure enough, Xiaohua deliberately chose a space fragment that was very complicated and almost shapeless. It was like a cotton cloud. When he got inside, there were no flowers or plants in the space, let alone strange beasts. There were only mountains, seawater, and a strange climate. Xiaohua drove the flying boat to fly in this space. In the time it took to smoke a cigarette, it was struck by lightning 10 times, encountered hailstones, heavy rain 7 times, and snow 6 times. Of course, such a bad climate was just a simple test for cultivators. It could not stop Xiaohua and the others from going further and further in the meteor belt. The situation after that was needless to say. Under Xiaohua's leadership, the flying boat passed through more than a dozen space fragments in succession. Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu were surprised, and even the disciples of the Confucian families were amazed. This was because these fragments were either filled with seawater, vast wilderness, continuous mountains, lost human tribe domains, dilapidated Buddhist temples, or barbarian continents where demonic beasts roamed. There were even 2 inexplicable voids. These voids did not have the transmission channel that Fairy Xingyu had mentioned. They were completely composed of thunder, lightning, and clouds. There was no land, no sea, no humans, and no beasts. However, it was also strange. The dozens of spaces that Xiaohua passed through were not particularly dangerous. Along the way, they were quite free. However, when the flying boat rushed into a space covered with green vines again, Fairy Xingyu could not help but say, "Spiritual Master Xiao, are you here to play in the meteor belt? Or do you want to pass through the meteor belt? If you want to play here, I'll let the female disciples of the Confucian families play with you, okay? When you're done playing, how about you take us out of this meteor belt?" Elder sister. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Do you think I'm playing? Don't you think I'm racking my brains to find a way out?" "I don't see it." Fairy Xingyu replied, "I just see you flying around comfortably. Back then, when I took the disciples of the star-picking tower into the Star Moon Palace, we only passed through 4 or 5 space fragments to reach the other side of the meteor belt. Look at you, there are more than a dozen space fragments, but you haven't seen the edge of the meteor belt. And what do you want me to say about you? I've passed through the meteor belt many times. Apart from the flower realm, I've seen more than 10 spatial fragments that you've passed through. Why haven't I seen any of these spatial fragments before?" "Big sister, there are millions of spatial fragments in this meteor belt. There are also millions of paths leading to the other side of the meteor belt. Does the path that I choose have to be the one that you have walked on?" Xiaohua pressed down on the flying boat and stopped in midair. He turned around and smiled. "Don't you think that the path this junior has chosen is very safe? You still have the nerve to say it's safe." When it came to safety, Fairy Xingyu laughed and retorted, "I never thought that I would almost die in the meteor belt. Then there's nothing I can do." Xiaohua shrugged his shoulders. He raised his head and looked at the green vines that covered the sky and said, "Why don't you drive the flying boat and pass through the meteor belt?" "Xingyu." Xueqi frowned and said, "Don't use people you don't suspect. Now that Xiaohua is driving the airboat, let him make his own decision." Xueqi. Fairy Xingyu raised her eyebrows and said, "Take a look. Where did he drive the flying boat to? This is probably a fragment of the 10,000 demon realm. This is a space that we have never seen before, right? If we let him fly like this, how long will it take for us to pass through the meteor belt?" "Well, presumably your injury has been controlled." Xueqi nodded. "If possible, you can drive the flying boat." "I won't drive the flying boat." Fairy Xingyu pouted. let Xiaohua drive the flying boat. When we reach the exit of the space, I will choose the spatial fragment. I see. Xueqi nodded and looked at Xiaohua. Xiaohua, what do you think? Xiaohua's mind did not seem to be in the conversation between the two. At this time, when he heard Xueqi's words, he came back to his senses and said, "Of course. However, this junior wants to stay in this space for a while. If possible, let Dongfang Yushan and the others drive the flying boat first. Senior can guide them to the exit of the spatial fragment and wait for this junior there for a while." "What's the matter?" Xueqi was a little puzzled and looked around and asked. Xiaohua smiled and looked at the disciples of the Confucian family in the distance who did not dare to approach. He whispered, "Junior still wants to return to the Dawn Rain continent? Junior knows that the 10,000 demon realm has a space vein, and also the Dawn Rain continent. If the 3 continents also have space veins that lead to the 10,000 demon realm, then can't Junior return to the Dawn Rain continent through the 10,000 demon realm? Therefore, Junior wants to see what the spatial fragment of the 10,000 demon realm looks like first." "Who told you that the 3 continents have space veins that lead to the 10,000 demon realm?" Fairy Xingyue sneered. "How come I don't know about this?" "Xingyue," Xueqi said, "you and I should understand the feeling of returning home. Even if the 3 continents have no space channel that leads to the 10,000 demon realm, this is still Xiaohua's hope. If he can find something in the spatial fragment of the 10,000 demon realm, wouldn't that be better? I'll listen to you." Fairy Xingyue impatiently turned to Dongfang Yushan and said, "You and the others drive the flying boat first and fly over there." "Yes, Junior understands." Dongfang Yushan and the others heard this and hurriedly flew over. Although they didn't know what was going on, they still drove the flying boat. "Junior will be back soon." Xiaohua nodded at Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue. His figure flickered and disappeared into the green vines in a moment. "Oh!" Seeing a few wisps of green with light flashing above the flying boat, Fairy Xingyue was a little surprised. Xiaohua actually knows the wood escape technique. Yes, and he seems to be very proficient in it. Xueqi was also a little surprised, but his tone was more of admiration. "Let's go." Fairy Xingyue urged Dongfang Yushan and the others to drive the flying boat away, while Xiaohua's figure appeared in another layer of green vines in the distance. This was a place full of green vines. There were thick vines between heaven and earth. These vines were either covered with fine hair or sharp thorns. Of course, there were more vines that were born with some strange runes. The vines floated in the air, forming clouds. The original ground was also covered with vines. There were also many spiritual grasses among the green vines on the ground. These spiritual grasses looked a little different from those in the 3 continents and the Dawn Rain continent. Not only were they much thicker, but there were also some strange veins on the surface of the spiritual grasses. Before Xiaohua appeared, there was a rustling sound in the whole world of green vines, as if the wind had blown past. However, after Xiaohua appeared, the rustling sound immediately disappeared. Although Xiaohua heard the sound of the wind, the surrounding space was quiet. Xiaohua smiled slightly. His figure flickered and disappeared again. After the time it took to drink half a cup of tea, the originally quiet space was once again filled with rustling sounds. Furthermore, between the vines, the spirit trees, and the spirit grasses, there were some green balls of light that were faintly swaying. Swoosh! There was a ripple in the space, and Xiaohua's figure appeared again. However, the green shadows floating among the green vines and plants disappeared instantly and returned to their original state. Xiaohua smiled slightly and did not stay here. His figure slowly flew and shuttled between the green vines. At this time, he understood that the so-called 10,000 demon realm was somewhat different from the 1,000 demons sacred realm. Although they both had the words demon, the demons in the 1,000 demons sacred realm were demons with flesh and blood, which was the demon race that corresponded to the human race. The demons in the 10,000 demon realm, other than the demon race in the 1,000 demons sacred realm, there were also grass demons, water demons, and mountain demons. In other words, Anything that could become a spirit in the world was a demon in the 10,000 demon realm. After flying for an entire meal's worth of time, Xiaohua stopped again. At this time, there were no longer green vines between the heaven and earth. Instead, there were some huge trees standing in great numbers. There was some light fog floating between these huge trees, and some indescribable light and shadow were faintly discernible in the light fog. There were even some obscure sounds coming from this light fog. Xiaohua thought for a moment and took out the Kunlun mirror. As the light vibrated, Xiaoguo flew out from the Shenhua continent. Master. When Xiaoguo saw Xiaohua, her small mouth flattened and cried out. She choked and said, "This little one is useless. This little one is ashamed to face Master."
Ah!
What's wrong?
Xiaohua was shocked.
Xiaoguo, don't worry. Tell me slowly. Master, I can't grow the spirit grass that you asked me to bring home. Xiaoguo wiped her tears as she recounted the whole story in shame. Xiaohua wanted to laugh, but when he saw Xiaoguo's extremely serious look, he tried to be serious and said, "Xiaoguo, don't worry. This is not your fault. It's Master who didn't think it through." Is that so? Master, it's not that this little one didn't do it well. Xiaoguo was surprised. The crystal-clear tears still hung on her face. Xiaohua nodded and said, "Of course, those spiritual herbs are not ordinary spiritual herbs. They are the immortal herbs used to refine the golden core you saw last time. He can't plant them on the Shenhua continent." Haha, so it's like this. This little one thought that this little one didn't need them. Xiaoguo's tears turned into laughter. Her curved eyes were filled with tears. She was extremely cute. Xiaohua lovingly wiped away the tears in the corner of Xiaoguo's eyes and said, "Don't worry about those immortal herbs. Master has more important things to give you." "Okay, Master, please tell me." Xiaoguo puffed out her small chest and said, "This little one will definitely complete it. You can definitely do this." Xiaohua smiled, but suddenly he thought of another thing and asked, "What about that Ganoderma? Master hasn't seen it for a long time." Chapter 45-31. Xiaohua had snatched the Ganoderma horse from Yun Guichong in the sword tomb back then. The Ganoderma horse had turned into a spirit herb as soon as it entered the space, but after the yin and yang split in Xiaohua's space, the Ganoderma horse had regained its spirit body. At the same time, Xiaoguo was also born in the space, becoming the first plant spirit body to take form in Xiaohua's space. After Xiaoguo, no more plant spirits were born in Xiaohua's space. It was as if all the Zhongxios were gathered in Xiaoguo's body. Because of Xiaoguo, who was self-taught in the art of refining pills, Xiaohua almost didn't pay attention to the Ganoderma horse. Xiaoguo had appeared on the Ganoderma horse earlier, but when Xiaoguo came out alone, Xiaohua had completely forgotten about the Ganoderma horse. At that moment, Xiaohua had some plans in his heart, and only then did he remember the Ganoderma horse he had in the past. "I'll let Master know," Xiaoguo said in all seriousness. "I used to play with the Ganoderma horse, but later I had to refine pills and share Master's worries, so I didn't have time to play with him. I saw the Ganoderma horse play very well with Little Silver a while ago." Little Silver? Xiaohua couldn't help smiling bitterly again, and the image of a chubby spirit mouse appeared in his mind. Xiaohua's experience in the heavenly prison had left him without any distractions, and he had also left Little Silver in the cold on Shenhua continent. It seems that Little Silver's mother has come back recently, so the Ganoderma horse should be with them. Xiaoguo said like a little adult again. "Haha, if that's the case, then that's good. You all can go and help Master." Xiaohua couldn't help laughing when he heard this. He waved his hand to shake the Kunlun mirror and brought Little Black, Little Yellow, Little Silver, and the Ganoderma horse out of Shenhua continent. "Daddy." As soon as they were out of the space, Little Yellow bounced and said, "Do you miss the boy? Could it be that there was something that made things difficult for Father again? Don't be afraid. The boy has already grown up. The boy will help you." "Hello, Daddy," Little Black said and stood quietly on the side. "Master." Sure enough, Little Silver was still fat, and his body looked several times bigger than before. He didn't have the spirit mouse's intelligence at all. The Ganoderma seemed a little afraid of Xueqi. It had been wagging its tail next to Xueqi, but when it saw Xueqi, it immediately tucked its tail between its hind legs and opened its mouth, but didn't say anything. "Why don't you guys take a look at where we are first?" Xueqi looked at these little things with a smile and asked in a low voice.
Where?
"Where is this?" Goldie looked around in surprise and asked a few questions. Then, it said regretfully, "There's nothing strange about it. Father, there isn't even a beauty in this place." "Why did you come here?"
Sweat.
Xueqi smiled bitterly. He didn't know if he should reprimand Goldie. "This place seems to be different from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm." Blackie looked around and said with some doubt, "However, there are actually quite a few spiritual items here." Little Silver's little eyes looked around, and a lazy expression appeared on his face.
Master.
Xueqi was pleasantly surprised. This little one seems to sense a very familiar aura. There seem to be many companions who are similar to this little one. And Xueqi smiled like an old fox. "Do you think it's better for these little friends to fend for themselves here? Or to cultivate on Shenhua continent like you and learn alchemy?" "Of course it's better for them to stay on Shenhua continent," Xueqi answered without hesitation. "To be able to do something for the master, to be able to make a difference and not waste one's life, this is the greatest happiness. To fend for themselves in this place, it's simply a waste of time."
Good.
Xueqi clapped his hands and said, "Master's task for you is that you must think of a way to help more little friends like you, so that they can pull themselves together from this waste of time and become useful spirits." "Really?" Hearing Xueqi's words, Xueqi's face glowed with a holy light, and a heavy sense of mission made even his voice a little low. "Of course." Xueqi nodded. "I'll leave the task of saving the fallen spirits on this land to you. Don't worry, Master. This little one will definitely complete this task. From now on, they must turn over a new leaf and work hard." Saying this, Xueqi's figure flashed as he was about to fly away. Xueqi hurriedly called out, "Let Jima follow you. Ride him over there." "Okay." Xueqi was even more grateful as he rode Jima away. "Daddy." Goldie smiled and said, "Could it be that you've taken a fancy to some big sister? You're too embarrassed to say it, so let boy do it." "Go." Xueqi glared at Goldie and said, "Go and find as many spirits as possible for Daddy. Don't you think Shenhua continent is too cold?" "That's right. That's right." Goldie's eyes lit up. "That's right. Big sister Dai watches you and Ya cultivate every day and doesn't have time to talk to boy at all. If you can find some spirits to talk to, spirits with some lines, that would be even better. Boy will go now." Saying this, without waiting for Xueqi to say anything else, Goldie slipped away, like a wisp of smoke. "Boy, go and take a look too." Little Black was always half a beat slower, and only now did he say this unhurriedly as he flew over. Seeing that all the little things had gone, and he was the only one left, Little Silver was a little flustered and made a squeaking sound. Xueqi waved his hand and instructed, "You go too, and take a look to see if there's anything good." "Yes, Master." Little Silver was overjoyed, and with a flash of silver light, he disappeared in a moment. "Ha ha!" Xueqi laughed heartily. He could almost see a bustling scene of a group of plant spirits like Xueqi refining pills in Shenhua continent one after another, and piles of pills were being refined endlessly. Xueqi smiled, sat down cross-legged, and began to meditate in meditation. He knew that this was a place where spirits were everywhere. If he released his divine sense or pressure, it would disturb the spirits and have a bad impact on his plan. Seeing that 2 hours had passed and Xueqi and the others still hadn't returned, Xueqi couldn't help but frown. He was afraid that Fairy Xingyu would get impatient and release her divine sense, or come to look for him personally. It was also here that some light and shadows flashed in the distance. Xueqi hurriedly stood up and was about to send a telepathic message, but when he saw the situation in front of him clearly, he couldn't help but be a little stunned. Admittedly, Xiahua could think of using the advantage of Xiaoguo's spirit body to trick those spirit bodies of plants, but he still underestimated Xiaoguo's persuasive power and charisma. He saw that under the green vines in the distance, rays of light and shadow were floating over like water. In front of them, Xiaoguo was riding on the Ganoderma horse, gesturing and saying something to several spirit bodies. Of course, these spirits weren't human, but plants and trees. Seeing Xiaoguo hurriedly jumped down from the Ganoderma horse and flew in front of Xiaohua to salute respectfully. Master, this little one was fortunate enough to not disappoint you. These are the 10 herbaceous tribes here. They know that Master is kind-hearted and are willing to serve Master. 10 herbaceous tribes. Xiaohua recovered from his surprise and said in a low voice, I'm afraid there are more than 10,000 spirits. I'll let Master know, Xiaoguo said proudly. Of the 10 herbaceous tribes, only 6 tribes have tribe leaders, and each tribe has about 13,000 spirit bodies like this little one. The 10 herbaceous tribes have a total of 150,000 spirit bodies. This many. Xiaohua looked at the light and shadows, and couldn't help but understand. Herbaceous spirit bodies were very thin, and could be the size of a thumb or as thick as a blade of grass. One light and shadow could have more than 10 spirit bodies, so 150,000 spirit bodies really wasn't a lot. Yes, Master. Xiaoguo nodded. If Master is willing, this little one will teach them the art of alchemy one by one. Of course. Xiaohua smiled. Are they all willing to come to Shenhua continent? Of course. Xiaoguo answered. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth here is already somewhat dried up, and herbaceous spirit bodies can't defeat wood spirit bodies, not to mention those beast races. So when this little one said it, they were all very happy. It's just that they still have 2 requests. What requests? Xiaohua was overjoyed. This was a win-win situation, and it was exactly what he wanted to see. The first request is that these 6 tribe leaders want to go and see the situation of our Shenhua continent. Xiaoguo smiled and pointed at the 6 slightly larger spirit bodies. When the 6 spirit bodies saw that Xiaohua had seen them, they immediately lowered their heads respectfully and placed their hands on their foreheads that were like stalks of grass. No problem. Xiaohua smiled and took out the Kunlun mirror and said, Master can send them in at any time. What's the second request? The second request is that Master can also turn them into a human form like this little one. Xiaoguo said proudly. They are very envious of this little one's appearance. Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, this shouldn't be a problem. However, if they want to turn into a human form, they need to cultivate. Master can't help just because you want to. Only when they cultivate to the same level as you, then they can transform. Yes, this little one understands. Xiaoguo replied and flew over to communicate with the 6 spirit bodies. Sure enough, when the 6 spirit bodies nodded, they once again transformed into a human form with a smile. Master, bring them in. Xiaoguo turned her head and said to Xiaohua. Xiaohua urged the Kunlun mirror to bring Xiaoguo and the 6 spirit bodies into the space. The Kunlun mirror flashed, scaring the spirit bodies into fleeing like water. Xiaohua didn't pay attention to these spirit bodies. His mind entered the space and turned into a jade archive. Xiaohua stood in midair. It was a bit strange. The 6 spirit bodies that followed Xiaoguo into the space were actually 6 vague human forms on Shenhua continent. They were much clearer and stronger than when they were in the space fragment. The 6 spirit bodies seemed to have noticed this, and they whispered something to each other. After a while, the 6 spirit bodies looked at the spirit fields again and respectfully said something to Xiaoguo. The Jade Archive Xiaohua saw that the matter was more or less settled and sent them out of the space. The 6 tribe leaders fell into the space fragment, and the dim light and shadows returned. They didn't wait for Xiaoguo to say anything and floated into the scattered light and shadows. The light and shadows began to flicker, and in just a moment, a pair of light and shadows under the lead of the tribe leaders floated in front of Xiaohua. Chapter 45-32. Master. Little Fruit smiled and said, "You can take them into your home first, and then I'll take you to take their original bodies as well." Okay. Xiaohua shook the Kunlun mirror, and his mind swept through these light shadows. Although there were more than 10,000 spiritual bodies, they did not consume much spiritual power and were taken into Shenhua continent in a moment. Soon after, the rest of the 9 plant races were also sucked into the space. Xiaohua was once again led by Xiaogua and Jima to a forest of giant trees. There were a lot of spirit grasses in this forest, but they didn't have any luster and looked listless. Presumably, without their spirit bodies, these spirit grasses had lost their essence. After Xiaohua took a look, the bodies of the 10 spiritual herbs on the 100 mu of land were also taken into the space. However, after taking these spiritual herbs, Xiaohua looked at the other spiritual herbs on the ground, and then looked at the 100 mu of empty space, and he fell into deep thought. Compared to the entire space fragment, the spiritual bodies that lived on the 100 mu of land were really a drop in the ocean. In other words, in this space fragment, the so-called spiritual bodies of herbs and wood were innumerable, and these spiritual bodies consumed a lot of heaven and earth spirit qi in this space fragment. If this space fragment was in the 10,000 demon realm, it would be fine, but this fragment was in the meteor belt. Although there were realm storms in the meteor belt, there would be replenishment of heaven and earth spirit qi, but it was still limited. The reason why the space fragment in the immortal realm that Xiaohua first set foot in was torn apart was because the space exit had been suppressed for a long time, and the expansion was unstoppable. On the other hand, it had something to do with the lack of immortal qi. Now, the space fragment in the 10,000 demon realm was showing signs of heaven and earth spirit qi drying up. If these spiritual bodies did not have other opportunities, they would disappear along with the heaven and earth spirit qi. Instead of letting these spiritual bodies disappear, it was better to let them move to Shenhua continent. At that thought, Xiaohua transformed back into a jade archive and landed on the Shenhua continent. At that moment, the 150,000 spirit bodies were excitedly staying in their main bodies, desperately absorbing the abundant heaven and earth spirit light that was of a higher grade than the heaven and earth spirit energy. All of them had long transformed into human forms. Jade Archive Xiaohua used his divine ability to imprint his will into the minds of these spirit bodies. These spirit bodies went crazy and were as excited as Xiaogua. After being sent out of the space by Jade Archive Xiaohua, they went towards the spatial fragment. Master? Looking at the many spirits frantically rushing away, even Xiaogua was stupefied. He calmed himself down, and looking up at Xiaohua with extreme worship, he said, "You're really amazing." This lowly one had to spend a lot of effort before they finally allowed this lowly one to see their clan leader. Only when this lowly one's mouth was parched did those clan leaders agree to come and take a look. Master only said a few words, and it made them so crazy. "This little one really admires you." Xiaohua laughed. He was really proud in his heart. He had done many things like plundering, but this was the first time he had done something like tricking a spirit body. He didn't expect Xiaogua to be so effective, and when he acted, it was even scarier. Father. At this moment, a slightly panicked voice came from afar. In midair, Xiao Huang's figure was flying over like the wind. Behind him, Xiao He was following closely. The 2 little ones' faces were somewhat nervous. Looking behind the 2 little ones, an earthen yellow spirit body that was several hundred feet in size was chasing after them. This spirit body was like a mountain. It didn't have any hands or feet. It flew in midair like a rolling ball. The air around the spirit body surged, setting off a series of whirlwinds. These whirlwinds were like raging waves that pounced on Xiao Huang. The earthen yellow spirit body emitted a very strange aura. It was very dignified, but it didn't have enough power. When it landed on Xiaohua, it didn't attract too much attention. Xiaohua frowned. His divine sense condensed like a hammer. Hung. It smashed on top of the earthen yellow spirit body. The earthen yellow spirit body spun in the air and actually stopped there. A burst of obscure fluctuations came over. These fluctuations were mixed with some vibrating sounds like pines. Master? Hearing this, Xueqi hurriedly said, "This spirit body asked who Master was and why you blocked it." At this moment, Xiao Huang had already flown to Xiao Hua's side. He looked very courageous. He turned his head and his big tail proudly wagged behind him. He shouted, come over if you have the abilities." Xiao Hua frowned and said, "Xiao Huang, what's going on?" Xiao Huang didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly replied, "Father." The boy obeyed orders and went to look for the spirit body in this space. In this space, there were spirit bodies everywhere. However, they were all ordinary. The boy felt that these spirit bodies might not be of interest to his father, so he went to look for them in the distance. When the boy saw this big guy, he felt that he was more suitable to be his father's subordinate, so he told him about it. In the end, this guy didn't want to. If he didn't want to, then he didn't want to. The boy also didn't force him. When he was about to leave, the boy happened to see another spirit body with a good figure. Speaking of the spirit body, Father, Yuanya is really too boring. How can he be worthy of Sister Dai? The boy thought that if he brought this spirit body home, he would first break them up. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hurriedly interrupted Xiaogui's endless words and asked, "Get to the point. Why did this spirit body want to kill you?" The boy also doesn't know. Xiao Huang was also puzzled. When the boy saw this spirit body, he used his silver tongue and talked about our family's beauty, Yuanya's strength, and his outstanding strength. The boy didn't say anything clearly. He just told the spirit body that he would find her a good husband. This big guy flew into a rage and wanted to kill the boy, without saying anything. Xiao Hua ignored Xiao Huang and turned to ask Xiao He, "Is Xiao Huang telling the truth?" "Yes, father," Xiao He replied concisely. And Xiao Hua nodded. He looked up at the spirit body and asked again, "What about that so-called good figure spirit body?" "I don't know. He shouldn't be here." Xiao Huang hurriedly replied, "That spirit body is very shy." Xiao Hua nodded and ordered, "Go, apologize to this spirit body. Say that you disturbed him and that it was a misunderstanding."
"Why?"
Xiao Huang raised his little face and said stubbornly, "How did I provoke him? I didn't touch a single hair on his body. I just talked to him, talked to another spirit body, and he wanted to kill me. He should apologize to me. Also, Father, you are a Mahayana cultivator, a supreme existence in the 3 continents. Boy apologizing to him will make Father lose face." Xiao Hua was somewhat displeased. He snorted and said, "Xiao Huang, Father doesn't know what you did wrong. But don't forget, you were the one who spoke to him first. If you didn't speak, why would he want to kill you? How about this, Xiao Huang? Think about it carefully. If you think you're not wrong, Father will kill this spirit body right now. I definitely won't let him go back alive. What do you think? As long as you pat your chest and say that you're not wrong." Xiao Huang hurriedly replied, "Father, you don't have to kill him, right? You just have to drive him away." "Yes," Xiao Hua said resolutely, "as long as you dare to pat your chest and say that you're not wrong." This. Xiao Huang hesitated. He raised his little paw and didn't lower it. In the end, he said, "Father, this may be a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" Xiao Hua asked. Boy didn't speak to that spirit body, and this big guy didn't have a particularly extreme reaction. It's just that the boy spoke too much, and this big guy became angry. Although Xiao Huang was a chatterbox, his thoughts were quite meticulous. He was still able to put himself in the other's shoes. "Then go and apologize." Xiao Hua nodded. Although Father needs face, Father disdains this kind of meaningless face. Furthermore, Father doesn't want you to become a hedonistic son of a rich family who bullies others. "Yes, Father." Goldie was quick to correct his mistake. He nodded and walked to a spot not far away. He faced the spiritual body and sang, "Big brother, I was rash earlier. If there's any trouble, please forgive me. As the saying goes, mountains don't move, water moves, and water doesn't move, demons move. We're all demons, and we see each other all the time. The mountains don't change, and the water flows forever. Roar. Without waiting for Xiao Huang to finish speaking, the mountain-like spirit body roared loudly. A fist-like thing flew out from the spirit body, streaking across the sky, and was about to smash Xiao Huang's body. Xiao Huang's figure flashed, and he was about to dodge. However, he thought of Xiao Hua's words, and his figure once again stood in the distance, not daring to move. Humph. Xiao Hua sneered. He grabbed again, and a huge golden hand that was several hundred zhong in size appeared out of thin air. Under the huge hand, not to mention the mountain-like spirit body that was several hundred zhong in size, even the space of several thousand zhong in size was imprisoned. Immediately, that huge hand slightly grabbed again. The mountain-like spirit body trembled and rapidly shrank. In a moment, it actually shrank to several hundred zhong in size. Woo-woo. Right at this moment, from the place where the mountain-like spirit body had flown over, another thin and tall spirit body arrived along with the wind. Before it could even fly in front of Xiao Hua, it immediately fell down in midair and babbled something from its mouth that no one knew what it was saying. Master. Xiao Gua hurriedly shouted. This spirit body said that this concubine is willing to serve this young master. Master, please spare her husband. Husband? Xiao Huang looked at this thin and tall spirit body in disbelief. He then looked at the spirit body that was several hundred zhong in size and said in shock, "This difference, isn't it too big?" Xiao Huang. Xiao Hua said coldly, "Did you see?" Father. Xiao Huang hurriedly replied, "It's all this boy's fault. Boy didn't expect it to be like this." Xiao Gua? Xiao Hua nodded. Explain to this spirit body. Yes. Xiao Gua hurriedly flew over and helped the thin and tall spirit body up. After a few words, the spirit bodies had transformed into a rather beautiful woman's appearance. She looked at Xiao Hua, then at Xiao Huang and nodded. Chapter 45-33. After hearing this, Xiao Gua respectfully says to Xiao Hua, "Master." She said she understood. Earlier little Huang spoke too fast, so she didn't understand. I reckon her husband also didn't understand. And Xiao Hua nods his head. With a wave of his big sleeve, that golden big hand immediately disappears. And that mountain-like spiritual body returns to its original size of several hundred zhong. At this moment, this mountain-like spiritual body doesn't dare to move carelessly. That huge spiritual body slowly rotates in midair. No one knows what it is thinking. That slender spiritual body flies to the mountain-like spiritual body's side and mutters a few words. The two spiritual bodies are about to turn around. A gust of wind sounds. On the ground all around, spiritual bodies rush over like a flood from the space. The first one is the wood spiritual body, who volunteered to go around looking for spiritual bodies. Master. Before the group of spiritual bodies even get close, they shout loudly, "Quickly open the door. We are waiting for you to come back." Unfortunately, Xiao Hua doesn't understand this voice. After Xiao Gua reminds him, Xiao Hua takes out Kunlun Mirror. With a wave of his hand, Kunlun Mirror transforms into a huge door in midair. Those spiritual bodies who come into contact with the light pillar above this door all disappear. Damn it. Xiao Hua looks at the seemingly endless amount of spiritual bodies among the green vines and huge trees. He unconsciously smiles bitterly. This movement is too big, isn't it? Even if I don't want to attract the attention of the two immortals, I'm afraid I can't do it now. Master. Suddenly, Xiao Gua says again, that spiritual body wants to go to our house to take a look. What is he going to do? Xiao Hua is somewhat impatient. He waves his hand and says, even if he can go in, I'm afraid it won't be easy to take his main body in. That. Xiao Gua says hesitantly, this spiritual body seems to want to send his wife in, but his wife is not willing to leave him. He even scolded his wife. His wife is still crying over there. AI. Xiao Hua hears, and his heart is moved. He sighs and says, who says plants are heartless and mountains are heartless? No matter if it is a mountain or a plant, as long as it has a spirit, it will have feelings. The Tao of heaven allows them to have spirits. How can this Xiao not fulfill their wishes? Xueqi, let them in. Yes, master. Xueqi happily agreed. The two spiritual bodies also fell into the Kunlun mirror's light pillar. Xiaohua's consciousness also followed in. As expected, of the two spirits that entered Shenhua continent, one transformed into an extremely burly man while the other transformed into a lithe woman. The two of them looked at each other with wild joy before looking around and whispering something to each other. The two spirits seemed to be quarreling, and then they hugged each other and cried. In the end, both of them made up their minds. Xiaohua understood a little. After waiting for a while, Xiaohua pulled them out of the space. The two spirits hurriedly kowtowed to Xiaohua and opened their mouths to say something. Xiaohua said from the side, "Master." One of them said that you must let her enter the space, and the other said that if he doesn't enter, she won't enter either. Although Xiaohua's words didn't distinguish between he and she, Xiaohua understood. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Tell them to go back first. In a while, I will go and see how big this big guy's body is. If it's possible, I will also take him." Okay. Xiaohua nodded and relayed Xiaohua's words. The two spirits left in high spirits. You and the others go back first. Xiaohua's heart stirred. With a sweep of his consciousness, he put Xiaohua and the others into the space. Where did little Silver go? Why isn't he back yet? Xiaohua looked into the distance and was truly bewildered. He thought to himself, he won't be like little Huang and cause a huge mess, right? Just as Xiaohua was thinking this, he heard Fairy Xingyu's laughter in the air. I knew it! What can happen to you? Sure enough, you're thinking about the spirits in this space fragment again. But Xiaohua, don't you think your ambition is a little too big? Xiaohua smiled and looked at Fairy Xingyu, who had revealed herself in the void. He shrugged and said, "Senior, this junior's heart is very small. How can it be too big and too wild? One spirit body to refine one immortal pill. You have so many spirits, how many immortal pills do you need to refine? You don't know how to refine them now. You have so many spirits, just to refine immortal pills for yourself in the future?" Fairy Xingyu looked at Xiaohua and asked, "Don't you think what you're doing is going against heaven and earth? Refine immortal pills?" Hearing this, Xiaohua's heart stirred. He thought of the medicinal pill he had refined for Fairy Hongxia back in Million Meng Mountains. That flying shadow pill seemed to have been made with the help of spirit blood. That was just spirit blood, and the flying shadow pill had such a powerful effect. If he used spirit bodies to refine immortal pills, what grade would it be? Senior misunderstands this junior. Xiaohua smiled and explained the situation. Finally, he said, since the spirit energy of heaven and earth in this space fragment is about to dry up, and this junior's Kunlun mirror needs spirit bodies to expand its spirit energy, why can't this junior take these spirits into the Kunlun mirror? If that's the case, this action of yours will benefit the spirit bodies. Fairy Xingyue seemed to be deep in thought. She did not ask Xiaohua how he could understand the words of the spirit bodies, nor did she ask what method he had used to coax these spirit bodies into the mirror. Instead, she said, "However, do you think you have the Dharma power to control so many spirit bodies in the Kunlun mirror? How would I know if I don't try?" Xiaohua retorted, "These spirits are going to die anyway. Don't tell me they'll die there? Humph, you're waiting for them to die before using their bodies, right?" Fairy Xingyu looked at Xiaohua confidently and asked. Xiaohua shrugged and said, "Senior, you can think whatever you want. Anyway, these spirits already believe this junior." What a glib tongue. Fairy Xingyu curled her lips and said, "Fairy Baihua was fooled like this back then. This is two different things." Xiaohua did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Forget it. Do whatever you want." Fairy Xingyu said, "Release the disciples of Zhai Xinglu from the Kunlun mirror."
Why?
Xiaohua asked curiously. "Isn't there a meteor belt ahead? Isn't it not there yet?" At this point, Xiaohua seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He hurriedly covered his mouth and laughed. Haha, this junior understands. What do you understand? Fairy Xingyu said somewhat angrily. I'm not as despicable as you think. I'm just thinking that after the meteor belt, your Kunlun mirror can no longer be used. You have to send the disciples of Zhaixing Lu out from this spatial fragment. I've never thought of letting them touch the spatial fragment of the 10,000 demon realm. Xiaohua smiled and raised his hand to point at the Kunlun mirror. A beam of light separated, and the disciples of Zhaixing Lu flew out from it. They all landed in the air. Xiaohua still said, Elder sister, this junior didn't say anything. This is all your own idea. Spirit bodies? Among the disciples of Zhaixing Lu, there were naturally knowledgeable ones. When they saw the tide of spirit bodies pouring into Xiaohua's space, they could not help but cry out. Hee, these spirit bodies are not fated to be with you. Xiaohua said with a smile. There may be some spiritual herbs, spiritual fruits, and other things ahead. You can go ahead and take a look. At this point, Xiaohua knew that Fairy Xingyu had come here because she was attracted by the tide of spirit bodies. However, her original intention was to let the disciples of Zhaixing Lu collect more spiritual herbs in this spatial fragment. Fairy Xingyu glared at Xiaohua and waved her hand. All of you, follow me. Yes, Palace Master. No one dared to be negligent, and all answered respectfully. After the disciples of Zhaixing Lu had left, Xiaohua looked at the spirit bodies that were still pouring in. He was really shocked and thought to himself, damn it, how many spirit bodies are there in this spatial fragment? I've already collected so many, but why can't I see an end to them? The 10 herb clans, how can they be more deceptive than Xiaogua? After a full hour, the spirit bodies that were pouring in gradually decreased. Xiaohua did not know how many spirit bodies he had collected. However, he knew very well that in today's Shenhua continent, the number of spirit bodies had long surpassed that of the human clan. It was just that these spirit bodies were confined in a certain area by him, and the human clan on Shenhua continent did not know about it at all. The spirit bodies of the 10,000 demon realm fragment had entered the spatial fragment, but their bodies were still in the spatial fragment. Xiaohua did not know how the spirit bodies cultivated, and he did not dare to abandon the bodies of these spirit bodies. After waiting for another hour, when all the spirit bodies had entered the spatial fragment, Xiaohua pointed at the Kunlun mirror again. The Kunlun mirror flew into the air. As Xiaohua's hands moved, hundreds of thick crystal lights fell into the spatial fragment like thunderbolts. The entire Kunlun mirror began to roar and gradually expanded. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the Kunlun mirror had turned into 100 miles in size. Then, Xiaohua's figure flashed and landed on the Kunlun mirror. The Kunlun mirror emitted a huge beam of light that shone on the ground and landed between the green vines and the giant trees. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The spiritual herbs and trees that had lost their essence rushed into the Kunlun mirror. Then, Xiaohua activated the Kunlun mirror to check the entire spatial fragment. This spatial fragment was not big, but it was definitely not small either. It had a radius of millions of miles. Xiaohua spent several days before he finally managed to absorb the true bodies of those spiritual bodies into his body. During the collection process, Xiaohua naturally rolled his eyes at Fairy Xingyu. When the disciples of the scholarly cultivator families and Zhaixing Lu saw how powerful Xiaohua's magic treasure was, they respectfully avoided him, but there were also envious gazes. While collecting the bodies of the spiritual herbs, Xiaohua naturally paid attention to Little Silver's whereabouts. However, when Xiaohua collected all the spiritual herbs, he did not see Little Silver. Strange. Xiaohua was even more puzzled. Did Little Silver encounter some danger? However, I don't seem to have seen any spirit body above 5th grade in this spatial fragment. With Little Silver's strength, how could he be in danger? After collecting the Kunlun mirror, Xiaohua urged his figure to check on Su Ji's injuries. After all, after falling into the spatial fragment, Su Ji did not come down from the flying boat. Xiaohua had a bad feeling in his heart. But at that moment, Xiaohua suddenly thought of the mountain-like spirit body. Xiao Hua hurriedly asked Little Black where the spirit body was and urged his figure to come to a rare spirit mountain. Chapter 45-35. The spirit mountain had a radius of more than 10 miles and was shaped like a heart. On one side of the heart-shaped spirit mountain, there was a green vine covering it. Seeing Xiao Hua descend, the spirit stone rumbled a few times and the mountain-like spirit body walked out. At the same time, the green vine swayed and shined brightly, like starlight. The slender spirit body also walked out from the green vine. Xiao Hua looked at the green vine and then at the spirit mountain. He frowned. There was no problem for him to put the green vine into the space, but it was a little troublesome to collect the spirit stone. It was not that Xiao Hua could not collect the spirit mountain that was more than 10 miles in size, but this spirit mountain was originally a part of the space fragment. Unlike the Tongtian Peak or the Five Elements magnetic force, Xiao Hua did not know where to collect it, let alone how to collect it without destroying the entire space fragment. After all, there were more spirits on the space fragment that were unwilling to enter the space. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and shook the Kunlun mirror, wanting to release Xiao Gua. However, with a flash of light, Xiao Hua changed Xiao Gua to Xiao He. After all, Fairy Xingyu had found Xiao Gua in the Tianfu abode. If she saw Xiao Gua here, she would suspect him for no reason. Xiao He told him about Xiao Hua's misgivings. The two spirits seemed to have already discussed it. Although Qing Man's spirit looked desolate, she couldn't resist the urging of the spirit of Spirited Mountain. She flew to Xiao Hua and bowed. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and said to Xiao He, "Xiao He, I don't understand how these spirits cultivate. Ask the spirit of the Spirit Mountain. The spirits of the plants can't leave their bodies for the time being. As the spirit of the mountain stone, can he leave? If he can also enter the Kunlun mirror." "Yes, father." Xiao He agreed, then asked the spirit body. Sure enough, the spirit body was trembling. Then it said a few words to Xiao He. Xiao He didn't say anything to Xiao Hua, so it agreed a few more times. Then, the spirit body suddenly turned into a stone pillar, kneeled in front of Xiao Hua, and muttered something. "Haha, get up." Xiao Hua raised his hand and helped the spirit up. He asked Xiao He, "What did you say to him?" "Father," Little Black answered, "this spirit body said that he doesn't know how to grow spirit herbs and is afraid that father will dislike him, so he doesn't dare to enter the Kunlun mirror." The boy told him that father is the most broad-minded. He doesn't need him to plant any spiritual herbs. As long as he doesn't separate him from his wife, father will definitely agree. "Good." Xiao Hua nodded. "Your words are father's words. You can go back first." As he spoke, Xiao Hua shook the Kunlun mirror and put Little Black away. He was going to take in the two spiritual bodies. At this time, a cracking sound suddenly came from the bottom of the spiritual mountain. Then, a wave more powerful than a tsunami rushed out from the depths of the spiritual mountain and spread towards the spatial fragment. At the same time, a layer of light that was almost visible to the naked eye swept across the ground faster than the wave. Wherever the light passed, the colors seemed to fade. Everywhere the light passed, faint cracks appeared on the ground. Chirp, 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 chirp. There was a panicked sound in the air, and Little Silver's figure was thrown out like a rock in this wave. Xiao Hua was alarmed and raised his hand to grab it. Boom. A golden palm several li wide sealed off the source of Little Silver's voice. But before Xiao Hua could activate his magic power, an inexplicable rule was born. Boom. Xiao Hua's big hand was shattered.
Oh?
Xiao Hua was blank. He activated his magic power again, and the big hand was born again. Boom. The rule was born again, and Xiao Hua's big hand was shattered again. Not good. Xiao Hua turned pale, with fright. He activated his magic power 9 times in a row, and the big hand was shattered 9 times. At that moment, Little Silver's figure was revealed. There was something the size of a fist in his mouth, and his entire body was modeled in the air. His little bright silver tail twitched weakly in the air, and it looked like it had actually been cut into several pieces. Seeing this, how could Xiaohua not know that Little Silver had gotten into big trouble? With a whoosh, he flew into the space where Little Silver was. But before he could land, a tremendous and unrivaled will of heaven and earth appeared in the air to block Xiaohua. Layers of distinct black and white spatial ripples appeared in the area several li around Little Silver like fish swimming in water. Xiaohua was burning with anxiety. He was about to activate his divine ability to rescue Little Silver, but when he saw so many black and white spatial ripples, his heart couldn't help but stir. Space? Xiaohua then raised his hand and pointed at the Kunlun mirror. Swish! A beam of light fell and covered the space where Little Silver was. Boom, boom, boom. Wherever the beam of light passed, all the spatial ripples disappeared. That unrivaled will of heaven and earth became even more valiant, as if it was resisting space. Rumble! Very strangely, tiny thunderbolts appeared on the edge of the Kunlun mirror's beam of light, and it started to collapse. Xiaohua's eyes swiveled rapidly. After several breaths, he tried to release his mind and follow the beam of light. Strangely, wherever his mind passed, the thunderbolts disappeared and the beam of light grew brighter and brighter. A space passage gradually appeared around Little Silver. When the beam of light completely enveloped Little Silver, his figure was also revealed. Only then did Xiaohua see that what Little Silver was holding in his mouth was something that looked like a gallbladder. This thing was covered in hair-thin cracks that went deep into its core. However, from these cracks, thousands of tiny rays of light flickered. These tiny rays of light came from a crystal grain that was almost invisible to the naked eye at the core of the gallbladder. The will of heaven and earth and the indescribable nomological laws came from this crystal grain. It was very clear that the will of heaven and earth and the nomological laws weren't something that the Kunlun mirror's beam of light could resist. But when they came into contact with Xiaohua's mind, their strong sense of resistance weakened. "Master, hurry." Little Silver could finally speak, and he cried out in his heart, "This is a good thing. Hurry up and put it away." Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had wanted Little Silver to find some good things, but he hadn't wanted Little Silver to make such a big fuss. "Master." Seeing Xiaohua hesitate, Little Silver urged, "My father said that if a man wants to do something, he should do it big. There's nothing in this space that's worthy of this little one's hand. Only this thing can be seen in this little one's eyes." Okay. Seeing that Little Silver was as greedy as he was and as arrogant as Little Yellow, Xiaohua smiled and was about to put it away with his mind. But just then, two tyrannical thoughts swept over from afar, and Fairy Xingyu cried out in surprise, Is this the spirit gallbladder?" "This? I've never seen or heard of it before." Xueqi's tired voice rang out. After a few breaths, two silhouettes with silver light stepped out of the spatial ripples. It was Fairy Xingyu and Xueqi. At that moment, Xueqi was already able to reveal his human form, but the silver light had fused with the armor from earlier to protect his entire body. His head was still covered by the faint silver light, and his appearance couldn't be seen. This faint silver light gave off boundless majesty. It wasn't just Little Silver and the two spirits, but even Xiaohua felt an indescribable pressure. "Senior?" Xiaohua hurriedly asked, "Can you still maintain your physical body?" I should be able to last until we reach the Starry Sky Maze." Xueqi nodded in reply, his expression hidden. "This spirit-seeking mouse is your spirit pet?" "Yes, senior," Xiaohua said with a smile. "When this junior sent the star-picking tower disciples out just now, I also let him out in passing, wanting him to find a treasure for this junior. Who would have thought that he would actually find this thing? I just don't know, what is this spirit gallbladder?" Spirit gallbladder, as the name implies, is the gallbladder of the spiritual world. Fairy Xingyu's voice was full of envy. Looking at the fist-sized gallbladder, she explained, "It is the foundation of the spirit chi world." The spirit chi world is born from the spirit gallbladder, and the spirit gallbladder also dies when the spirit chi world is annihilated. Xiaohua, you actually got this thing. I don't know if your luck is good or bad. Oh, what does senior mean? Xiaohua seemed to understand something. He looked at Fairy Xingyu with a smile and said, "This junior's luck has always been good." "Of course your luck is good." Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, "We thought this fragment was a corner of the 10,000 demon realm. But I was wrong. This fragment should be a fragment of a world parallel to the 10,000 demon realm. And it definitely isn't the 10,000 demon realm because the spirit gallbladder of the 10,000 demon realm is in the 10,000 demon realm. It can't be in this fragment. However, your luck doesn't seem to be as good as you think. Although this fragment is the core of a world, this world has collapsed. If it weren't for a coincidence, this space fragment wouldn't exist here. It would have been annihilated long ago. Of course, since the spirit gallbladder has been taken away by you, this space fragment will no longer have spirit chi. The fragment will eventually become fragments and won't exist for long. As for this spirit gallbladder, it is on the verge of annihilation. Even if you get it, it will be meaningless to you. Those spirit bodies can provide spirit chi in your Kunlun Wonderland and maintain it, but this spirit gallbladder is not something that your Kunlun Wonderland can nourish. Xiaohua frowned and said, "Even if I put this spirit gallbladder back now, it probably won't work, right?" "Of course." Fairy Xingyu nodded. If the spirit gallbladder wasn't about to be annihilated and the core of this world was about to shatter, it would be absolutely impossible for your spirit pet to take the spirit gallbladder out of the core of the fragment. "What about the spirit bodies on this space fragment?" Xiaohua asked hurriedly. "What will happen to them?" Fairy Xingyu glanced at Xiaohua and asked, "Do you still need to ask?" "Well, this junior understands." Xiaohua nodded and asked again, "Senior, this spirit body is the spirit of this spirit mountain. Do you have the means to pull this spirit mountain out? This junior can take this spirit mountain into the Kunlun mirror." Chapter 45-36. That's not a problem. Xueqi nodded. "I can pull this spirit stone out of the ground. Why do you need this spirit mountain?" Fairy Xingyu waved her hand. When the spirit gall was still around, this spirit mountain was useful to the spirit body. Now that the spirit gall is gone, this spirit mountain is just a shell. You just need to put it in the Kunlun immortal realm and then find a stone that can be put in somewhere else. Actually, to be honest, this spirit body is a mountain spirit and is more useful than those plant spirits. If you put it in the Kunlun immortal realm, it will be of great use to the Kunlun mirror. This junior understands. Relieved, Xiaohua then turned to Little Silver and said, "Release this spirit guts and ask this spirit body if it can understand what you're saying." "Yes, my lord." Little Silver obediently released the spirit gall. It flew out of Little Silver's mouth and floated in the air. Layers of dark green and withered yellow intertwined. Amidst the light and shadow, the images of different interfaces appeared one after another, but they disappeared as soon as they fell into the space. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't say anything, Little Silver released the spirit gall and flew over to whisper in front of the mountain-like spirit body. Fairy Xingyu couldn't help frowning again. She was very surprised by Xiaohua's elusive methods. After a while, Little Silver replied, "My lord, he doesn't know what you're talking about, but I've already told him." Xiaohua nodded. "What does he mean?" Xiaohua nodded slightly and asked again. "Oh, I understand." Little Silver was a little reserved in front of Xiaohua. He didn't understand what Xiaohua meant at first, but when Xiaohua asked, he immediately nodded and whispered a few more words to the mountain-like spirit body. Boom, boom, boom. The mountain-like spirit body kowtowed a few times at Xiaohua before its huge body rolled away. At the same time, the slender spirit body also hurriedly flew away. "Little Silver?" Xiaohua asked curiously. "Why did he run away? Didn't you tell him not to put the spirit mountain into the Kunlun mirror?" "I didn't." Little Silver chuckled and said, "I told him that this space is about to be finished. If he wants to live, it's better for him to hide in Daddy's Kunlun mirror." Furthermore, this lowly one also told him that if he had any close neighbors, he should inform them as well. Don't regret it later.
Haha.
Xiaohua laughed. You're really good. You're as good as your father. Of course. Little Silver hurriedly replied, although Daddy isn't this little one's biological son. This little one grew up with Daddy and called you mother for so many years. How could this little one not do the same to Daddy? Where did the mountain spirit go? Xueqi was confused. Senior, you'll know soon enough. Xiaohua pretended to be mysterious. As expected, in less than half a cup of tea's time, the entire space began to tremble. Hundreds of mountain spirits flew out from the ground. The largest of these mountain spirits were several thousand meters tall, and the smallest were several dozen meters tall. They all flew around the spirit gallbladder and let out a whining sound. Swish, swish, swish. After the mountain spirits, all kinds of spirits actually flew over. They all fell down in front of the familiar fluctuations and aura of the spirit gallbladder. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the entire world was filled with many spirits. These spirits were colorful, but they hadn't solidified yet, and their strength was too shallow. Seeing this, how could Xueqi not know what was going to happen? He looked at Xiaohua, not knowing what to say. Even Fairy Xingyu had a sneer on her face as she reminded Xiaohua, the Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent have a saying, a man whose heart is not content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. You've already collected so many spirits, it's enough for your Kunlun wonderland. These spirits are all the spirits of this space. You have to think about it carefully. They might destroy your Kunlun mirror. Xiaohua replied without hesitation, Senior, this junior knows very well. Although this junior's heart aches for my Kunlun mirror, I don't want the Kunlun wonderland to be occupied by these spirits. However, since these spirits have become spirits, they have a life. If this junior doesn't collect them into the Kunlun mirror, they will die. When this junior thinks that a world bigger than the 3 continents is only so big now, and so many spirits have already perished, this junior's heart aches. If this junior didn't know, it would have been fine. But now that this junior knows that it can save their lives, not to mention the Kunlun mirror, even if this junior risks my own life, I will give it a try. After all, to this junior, it's just a risk, but to them it's the hope of survival. Hiss. Fairy Xingyu was greatly moved, but Xueqi wasn't too surprised. He just looked at the spirits in the sky indifferently and pondered. Xiaohua. Fairy Xingyu said in a low voice, I can't tell if you're sincere or not. If you're sincere, you're definitely the most loving person in the immortal world. But if you're not sincere, you're the most greedy hypocrite in the world. What if it's half true and half false? Xiaohua didn't care about what others said, and asked with a smile. Fairy Xingyu was stunned. After a moment, she smiled and said, even if it's half true and half false, you can still become a Buddha. Namo Methriya Buddha. Xiaohua smiled slightly, put his palms together, and chanted the name of Buddha.
Ah.
Fairy Xingyu was slightly stunned. Then, she covered her mouth and laughed. She also put her palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. Namo Amitabha. I'm here to pay my respects. Ha, ha, ha. Xiaohua didn't understand at first, but after a moment, he laughed again and asked, Senior, are you a Buddhist, a Taoist, or a Confucian cultivator? I am whatever you are. Fairy Xingyu said, pretending to be profound. Xueqi ignored the two of them. He thought for a moment and said seriously, Xiaohua, it's already good that you have a heart of universal love. However, I also think that you should act according to your ability. How about this? Xingyue and I will help you collect these spirits, and then let the disciples of Zhai Xinglu help you collect the bodies of these spirits. As for the bodies of the mountain rock spirits, it's fine if you don't collect them. After all, the bodies of the mountain rock spirits are illusions in the Kunlun wonderland. If you really take their bodies in, it will have a great impact on the entire wonderland. Xiaohua looked at Xueqi. Although he couldn't see his appearance clearly, Xiaohua could believe that Xueqi was warm-hearted. He nodded fiercely and said, Thank you, Senior. This is what I should do. Xueqi replied, It's a pity that I haven't activated my fairy artifact, nor do I have a spatial fairy artifact. Otherwise, I would have collected them directly. These are all fresh lives. I was lucky, and so were the two seniors. This is all arranged by the heavens. The way of heaven must be watching our merits. Xiaohua said emotionally. Merits are the business of the Buddhist sect. It has nothing to do with my Taoist sect. Xueqi replied faintly, I just want to live up to my conscience. Senior, it's enough that you have this thought. Xiaohua looked at Fairy Xingyu and asked Xueqi, Senior, how should we do it? Xueqi also looked at Fairy Xingyu and said, Xingyu, I'm not very familiar with this spiritual gallbladder. How do you think we should deal with it? Fairy Xingyu seemed to have thought about it a long time ago. She said, Xiaohua, try putting this spiritual gallbladder into the Kunlun mirror first. I can't guarantee that the Kunlun mirror can hold this thing of heaven and earth. Okay. Xiaohua nodded and activated the Kunlun mirror. As the beam of light shone brightly, his mind also rolled up the spiritual gallbladder. Buzz. The spiritual gallbladder slowly moved. At this time, the spiritual gallbladder was different from the one in Little Silver's mouth. Every time the spiritual gallbladder moved an inch, the space collapsed an inch, and the will of heaven and earth moved an inch. As the spiritual gallbladder moved, not only did the light beam of the Kunlun mirror shake, but the Kunlun mirror itself also shook violently. Marks and cracks appeared on the surface of the mirror. Xueqi raised his hand and was pulled back by Fairy Xingyu again. She whispered, Xueqi, this depends on how well Xiaohua can control the Kunlun mirror. We can't interfere, Xueqi naturally understood, but he was really worried about Xiaohua. Xiaohua was confident that he could put this spiritual gallbladder into his space. However, in front of these two immortals, he was afraid that he would reveal the flaws of his space. Therefore, he had to carefully activate his mind and look for an opportunity. Seeing that the spiritual gallbladder was getting closer to the Kunlun mirror, the Kunlun mirror was getting more and more shattered. It couldn't hold on at all. Xiaohua simply gritted his teeth and shouted, Keep! The Kunlun mirror shone brightly, and the beam of light fell like a waterfall. The moment the beam of light fell, the spiritual gallbladder suddenly disappeared. It had been taken into Xiaohua's space. When the spiritual gallbladder entered the space, it didn't fall into the Shenhua continent like the other spiritual bodies. Instead, it floated in the void. Crack. As soon as the spiritual gallbladder settled down, its shell, which was already full of cracks, cracked and shattered. Crystal grains, which were almost invisible to the naked eye, appeared. Then, a powerful will of heaven and earth emerged from these crystal grains and rushed into the void. This will of heaven and earth was even stronger than when the spiritual gallbladder had moved. The void was completely messed up. Layers of tiny whirlpools rushed toward the Shenhua continent and the other spaces with this will of heaven and earth. Boom! It seemed that the distance between this crystal grain and the other spaces was different. However, the will of heaven and earth crashed into all the spaces at the same time. A deafening roar resounded in the void, causing the entire space to tremble. Then, dozens of similar wills of heaven and earth emerged from the various spaces. They quickly smoothed out the whirlpools of space and went back into the crystal grain. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Strange explosive sounds were produced around the crystal grain. Lights of various colors were also produced in the entire void. After a while, all the lights rushed into the crystal grain from all directions. Boom. An even louder explosion was produced from the crystal grain. The space around the crystal grain instantly exploded and expanded wildly. The nearby space, which had not matured, was enveloped by this explosion. That space had just entered the crystal grain. Whoosh! A hurricane appeared around this space. A powerful suction force came out of this space and passed through the hurricane to land on the Shenhua continent. The spiritual bodies and their real bodies that Xiaohua had already taken into the Shenhua continent were all sucked into the space in a flash. As the spiritual bodies entered the space, it became bigger and bigger. It grew until it was tens of millions of miles in size before it slowly stopped. A continent that looked like a spatial fragment was already taking shape. Chapter 45-37. Naturally, the brilliance could not stop Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu's thoughts. Although they were a little surprised that the spiritual gall would suddenly disappear when it was still some distance away from the Kunlun mirror, they were not personally controlling the Kunlun mirror after all, so they could not say anything. Seeing that the Kunlun mirror had taken the spiritual gall, Xueqi's heart was immediately relieved. He said loudly, "Xiaohua, quickly take a look at the Kunlun Wonderland." "Yes, senior." Xiaohua's mind took back the spiritual gall and immediately shook the Kunlun mirror. The Kunlun mirror shook violently in the air as if it was ill. At this time, after listening to Xueqi's words, Xiaohua agreed and took the opportunity to enter the space. Sure enough, Xiaohua's mind entered the space and instantly noticed the changes in the space. He fell into a new space and turned into Jade Archive Xiaohua. He closed his eyes slightly and felt the spiritual energy between heaven and earth that was different from that of Shenhua continent. He said to himself, "This space is born from the spiritual gall, and it is also the place where the spirits live. Let's call it the spiritual realm. I just don't know what's the difference between this spiritual realm and the 10,000 demon realm." Jade Archive Xiaohua stood in the air and felt the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the spiritual realm becoming more and more abundant. He looked at the many spirits happily absorbing the spiritual energy with the help of their bodies. A harmonious and peaceful aura emanated from Jade Archive Xiaohua and slowly filled the entire spiritual realm. After a while, Jade Archive Xiaohua came out of the spiritual realm. Xiaohua raised his hand, and the aura of the spiritual realm fell on the Kunlun mirror. The shaking of the Kunlun mirror slowly stopped. Xiaohua said with a smile on his face, "Senior, fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. The spiritual gall has stabilized in the Kunlun Wonderland, and it seems that there are changes that I don't know about. If you want to take it out now, you can't."
Good.
Xueqi clapped his hands and said, "This is good. With the spiritual gall, these spirits in the lost realm will have a good place to go. Xiaohua, take out the Kunlun mirror. Xingyue and I will help you." "Haha, many thanks, seniors." Xiaohua laughed heartily and waved his hand again. The Kunlun mirror rushed into the air and expanded to several kilometers in size. While Xiaohua was activating the Kunlun mirror, Fairy Xingyu said a few words. However, as her voice fell, it turned into a white crane in midair. Fairy Xingyu raised her hand and tapped the top of the white crane's head. A red light appeared on the top of the white crane's head. The white crane spread its wings and let out a clear cry. It soared into the sky and disappeared in a moment. Boom, boom, boom. As Xueqi's hands moved, a huge crystal light suddenly appeared in the void. At the center of the crystal light, there were wisps of thin silver. Wang, wang, wang. Crystal light appeared around the Kunlun mirror and rushed into it. The Kunlun mirror let out a buzzing sound and rapidly expanded. In a few breaths of time, it was hundreds of miles wide. Fairy Xingyue smiled and said, "I'll help you too." As her voice fell, Fairy Xingyue formed a seal with both hands. A crescent moon rushed toward the surface of the Kunlun mirror like a sickle, and a cluster of starlight followed behind the crescent moon unhurriedly. Puff puff. The crescent moon and starlight crashed into the Kunlun mirror. Woo woo. A huge whirlpool appeared on the surface of the Kunlun mirror. The whirlpool gradually filled the entire surface of the mirror. A powerful suction force was generated from the whirlpool, covering all the spiritual bodies within several hundred miles. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. There was no suspense at all. One by one, the spirits crashed into the vortex. Xiaohua did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly activated the Kunlun mirror to absorb the spirits that rushed into the Kunlun Wonderland. Sure enough, as Fairy Xingyue had said, in just a moment, the Kunlun mirror began to shake. A large number of spirits rushed in, causing a change in the Kunlun wonderland. Xiao Hua was anxious. He hurriedly released his mind and created another vortex at the vortex of the Kunlun mirror, drawing these spirits into the spiritual realm of the space. Fortunately, these spirits were somewhat similar to the vengeful spirits that Xiao Hua had collected in the hidden immortal continent. Although Xiao Hua was a little caught off guard, he was not flustered. At first, he was unfamiliar with it, but in a moment, he was familiar with it. Seeing that the spirit bodies nearby had been collected, Xueqi called out again, "Xiao Hua, you come with us and quickly collect all the spirit bodies in this spatial fragment. Who knows when a spatial fragment that has lost its spiritual gall will shatter?" Okay. Xiao Hua's spirit soared as he rushed into the air and said, "Today, being able to join hands with the two seniors is the happiest thing in my life." With the help of the two immortals, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue, although the number of spirits absorbed into the spiritual realm this time was 100 times more than before, the speed was not slow. In particular, Xiao Hua had deliberately released the aura of the spiritual realm in the Kunlun mirror. All the spirits, even some beast spirits, did not resist and were obediently absorbed into Xiao Hua's space. While Xiao Hua and the others were busy, the disciples of Zhaixing Lu were not idle either. They flew to different parts of the space fragment, collected all the spirits, and handed them to Xiao Hua in the end. The disciples of Zhaixing Lu moved. When the disciples of the Confucian family heard the news, they also came to help. Not to mention that sending all the spirits in a space into the Kunlun mirror was a grand occasion in their lives. Even if they helped these spirits who were on the verge of death escape, it was a merit that they were willing to do. The disciples of the aristocratic families of Confucian cultivators might not know how Wenxing cultivated, but the disciples of the four aristocratic families, Dongfang Yushan, Ximen Hingyue, Nangong Pingping, and Baiming Qihan, had vaguely learned some secrets from their elders. They knew very well how rare the merit of teaching was. They also knew that this kind of merit might not be comparable to the merit of teaching, but after all, this was a life-saving action. These orthodox disciples of Confucian cultivators were also very willing to do it. Therefore, no one was slacking off, and no one was concealing anything. After Xiao Hua, Xueqi, and Fairy Xingyu collected the countless spirits, the disciples of Zhaixing Lu and the disciples of Zhaixing Lu also brought over the spirit wood and other spirit materials they had collected. Xiao Hua accepted them with a smile. His impression of the four aristocratic families had changed a little. After busying themselves, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu led the disciples back to the flying boat. Xiao Hua took Little Silver and flew around the space fragment again. After a thorough inspection, he returned to the flying boat with relief. The flying boat was now stopped in the air. Above them was a meteor belt, and there were more starlight fragments than before. When Xiao Hua flew back, Fairy Xingyu was frowning and looking at the starry sky, as if she was having a hard time deciding. Xiao Hua had already said that he would leave the choice to Fairy Xingyu this time. He didn't want to investigate, but when he thought about how Fairy Xingyu was just a softie at heart, he rolled his eyes and opened his delusion breaker magic eye again. Sure enough, in his magic eye, the boundary storms in the starry sky were very complicated. There were no obvious signs of safety in the storms near each space fragment. Xiao Hua looked at them for a moment, then asked in a low voice, "Senior, this meteor belt is really hard to choose. Do you have any good suggestions? Didn't you find anything special?" Fairy Xingyu didn't answer, but asked another question instead. Xiao Hua was puzzled. He shook his head and said, "I didn't find anything special. I just found that the boundary storms near these space fragments are similar. It seems that it won't be easy to choose any of them. If that's the case, why should I worry? I just need to pick one at random." Fairy Xingyu rolled her eyes at Xiao Hua. "What I'm worried about now is how to find the space fragment with a transmission channel in this starry sky." Xiao Hua was puzzled. He looked at the meteor belt again and asked, "Senior, do you mean that there might be a space fragment in this starry sky that can directly pass through the meteor belt?" "Yes." Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, "We have encountered this starry sky several times before. There were 2 times when we were lucky enough to find the space fragment that could directly pass through the meteor belt. However, those 2 times were by chance. It seems that there is nothing special about this space fragment. Xiaohua thought for a moment, then nodded and said, if that's the case, I'll take another look and see if I can help you. If you can really find it, I'll really admire you. Fairy Xingyu said in disbelief. She simply leaned close to Xueqi and sat cross-legged on the flying boat. At this time, the disciples of Zhaixing Lu were sitting around Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu. The disciples of the Confucian aristocratic family were standing on the periphery. The celestial imperial flying boat was huge, so it didn't seem crowded even with tens of thousands of people standing there. Xiaohua opened his Dharma eye again and carefully looked at the space fragment. Since he already knew that he was looking for a space passage, he naturally didn't need to pay attention to the realm storm. He spent a full 2 hours looking at the space fragments near him one by one. A smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. These space fragments all had different splendors and colors. However, if there were only black and white splendors, there were 4 more in this starry sky. Of course, the black and white splendors in these 4 space fragments were very obscure. It was not easy to identify which one was the transmission passage. However, when he carefully looked at the realm storm around these 4 space fragments, Xiaohua keenly saw that one of the realm storms on the left had condensed into the shape of a vortex. If there was no accident, there should be a passage in this space fragment that led to the other side of the meteor belt. Xiaohua didn't say it out loud. Instead, he asked respectfully, Senior, have you found anything? I think 3 of them are more likely to be found. Fairy Xingyu didn't stand on ceremony. She pointed to 3 starlights of different shapes and said, if you are not confident, the 3 of us will each lead 3 groups of disciples into these 3 space fragments. Xiaohua naturally knew that this was the method that Fairy Xingyu had used previously. He smiled and said, Senior, I think that fragment is more interesting. Oh?
Why?
Fairy Xingyu looked at it for a moment. There was also a faint silver light mixed with starlight between her eyebrows. Then, she asked in confusion. Xiaohua naturally wouldn't answer truthfully. He only smiled and said, because the lines of that space fragment are more special. When Fairy Xingyu heard this, she couldn't help but take another look. The space fragment that originally didn't have any special features was really special when Fairy Xingyu looked at it carefully. It actually looked like Chapter 45-38.
Bah.
Fairy Xingyu spat at Xiaohua and said, why are all men so filthy?
Ah?
Xiaohua was just saying it casually.
How could he see anything?
He did not know the origin of this filthy thought. However, he was only surprised for a moment before he smiled and said, Senior's heart doesn't seem to be pure. What I said doesn't seem to be what you think. Forget it. Fairy Xingyu waved her hand and asked Xueqi, what do you think? Listen to Xiaohua. Xueqi seemed to have great confidence in Xiaohua. All right then. Fairy Xingyu did not refute. She raised her hand and took out another astrolabe from her bosom and handed it to Xiaohua. Xiaohua, if you are right, the exit of this transmission channel is opposite the meteor belt. However, the transmission channel in the void fragment is natural and the direction of transmission is changeable. When we get there, we may not be in the same place. This is a magic treasure refined by Xueqi. It can be activated with a thunderbolt.
Take it.
When you get there, you can find us. Okay. Xiaohua took the astrolabe and carefully put it away. I understand. Then Fairy Xingyu looked at the flying boat under her feet and said, if it is a transmission channel, I'm afraid this immortal imperial equipment can no longer be used. If the transmission channel inside is not stable, the immortal imperial equipment of the heavenly court will crash the transmission channel. After saying that, Fairy Xingyu said loudly, disciples, listen to my command. Get off the flying boat and get into formation. Yes. The disciples of Zhaixing Lu answered and got off the flying boat. The disciples of the aristocratic families did not dare to delay and hurriedly flew off the flying boat. Most of the disciples of the aristocratic families lined up. Dongfang Yushan and a dozen other people activated their secret techniques at the same time. A dozen strange multicolored lights fell on the flying boat. The flying boat gradually shrank to the size of a palm. Dongfang Yushan raised his hand and stuffed it into his bosom. Fairy Xingyu did not talk nonsense. Just like before, she raised her hand and took out the astrolabe. Groups of flying birds flew out of the astrolabe again and flew toward the spatial fragment that Xiaohua had pointed out. "I'll take the lead." Xueqi did not wait for Xiaohua to speak. He floated up and flew out on the flying birds. Xiaohua touched his nose and said with a smile, "Since Senior is taking the lead, I'll finish the rest." "Yes." Fairy Xingyu responded and gave orders to the Zhaixinglu disciples with great familiarity. The Zhaixinglu disciples followed Xueqi. After the star-picking tower disciple flew away, Fairy Xingyu nodded at Xiaohua and flew away. Junior thanks Taoist Master Xiao. Dongfang Yushan and the other aristocratic family disciples were all very happy when they saw Xiaohua raise his hand to signal them to fly up. After saluting Xiaohua one after another, they flew towards the meteor belt. This meteor belt was the same as before. It was also a dangerous place. Nearly 100 disciples of Zhaixinglu were accidentally swept into the spatial storm. Dozens of people from the scholarly families also met with misfortune. Under such circumstances, even people as strong as Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu were powerless to help. Xiaohua could only watch, unable to help. Xiaohua was the last one to rush into the gray brilliance. What greeted him was a huge void. This void was filled with black and white spatial ripples. Xiaohua's figure had just appeared when the void immediately collapsed like tofu. Then, a crooked and seemingly very fragile spatial passage appeared. Xiaohua even saw layers of spatial vortexes rushing into the depths of the void within the spatial passage, and the Confucian cultivator disciple who had just entered had already disappeared without a trace. That's true. Xiaohua released his soul consciousness and probed the teleportation passage. He thought to himself, if that immortal imperial equipment flew directly over, it would first break through this passage. Perhaps the space would collapse and all of us would be wiped out. Although the teleportation passage was a little fragile, it was safe. Xiaohua flew out of this crooked passage without any danger. When his eyes flashed, the starry sky disappeared. What greeted him was an extremely strange place. This place was like a large hall, and also like a mountain range. There were vague mountain ridges in the surroundings that were immersed in an inexplicable darkness. Even someone as strong as Xiaohua could only release his spiritual force to a distance of 10,000 feet. Any further, and he seemed to encounter a hard stone wall that he could not break through. Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat as he hurriedly probed the space. Indeed, as Fairy Xingyu had said, he could no longer sense the space. Damn it! Xiaohua frowned and cursed under his breath. He took out his astrolabe again. He was a little doubtful. He could not even sense the space. Would Xueqi's Dharma treasure be useful? Is that Senior Xiao in front? Just as Xiaohua was about to use Unstoppable Thunderbolt, the space in the darkness not far away rippled slightly, and then a black and white brilliance surged out, and a figure familiar to Xiaohua appeared from the brilliance. Wasn't that Zhu Qing? Zhu Qing had just calmed down when he saw Xiaohua. He could not help but be surprised and delighted. When Xiaohua saw that Zhu Qing had arrived here after him, he somewhat understood. He knew that the teleportation passage not only sent everyone in different directions, but also at different times. Hearing Zhu Qing speak, Xiaohua nodded and said, "Yes, it's me." "That's great." Zhu Qing was very happy. He flew over and bowed. Junior greets Senior Xiao. Seeing Zhu Qing bow respectfully again, Xiaohua felt a wave of discomfort behind his neck. He smiled and helped Zhu Qing up. "Zhu Qing, I am going to meet up with your palace lord. If you are willing, you can come with me." Zhu Qing got up and smiled apologetically. Junior cannot help where the palace lord is going. Junior will not go with senior. Oh. Xiao Hua was surprised. He smiled and said, Then where are you going? Is it where all the disciples of Zhaixing Lu go? I will let senior know. Zhu Qing answered honestly. Long before coming to the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm, my palace lord has already said that as long as we pass through the meteor belt, we will have to rely on our own fortuitous encounters. She will not interfere anymore. Of course, she has been to Xingyue Palace several times and has already scouted out the less dangerous places around here. She has also told us about the places that are helpful to our cultivation. Junior and the rest of us can find our own places to train according to our own circumstances. When Xingyue Palace appears again, we can go out as we wish. I see. Xiao Hua nodded. Then I will not bother you anymore. At this point, Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, and he asked again, All right, where you train, can you use Cosmos bags? Some places can, some places can't. Zhu Qing answered. This is Junior's first time here, so I am not very clear about the details. Good. Xiao Hua said with a smile. I understand. As he spoke, Xiao Hua formed a seal with his left hand and activated the thunderbolt technique in his body. A thick bolt of lightning landed on the astrolabe. The astrolabe flickered a few times, like a candle in the wind, and was quickly extinguished. There was no way to know where Su Ji and Fairy Xingyue were. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and kept the astrolabe. He said, In that case, I will go with you to take a look. After all, I have brought some disciples with me. I can't let them come here for nothing. Senior, please. Zhu Qing had already seen the power of Xiao Hua's Kunlun mirror and naturally thought that Xiao Hua had brought his disciples to Xingyue Palace. Seeing that Zhu Qing was still so polite, Xiao Hua had no choice but to say, Zhu Qing, I don't know where you're going to train. You should lead the way. Yes, senior. Zhu Qing obeyed the rules and agreed. She looked around and flew in a certain direction. After flying for a few miles, the number of Zhaixing Lu disciples around them began to increase. These disciples were originally a little nervous, but when they saw that Xiao Hua was here, they felt relieved. Xiao Hua was a little puzzled. He looked around at the Zhaixing Lu disciples who were flying with their heads down and asked Zhu Qing, it's dark here, and we can't use our divine consciousness.
How do you know where to go?
Zhu Qing raised his hand and pointed to a curve in the darkness in the distance. He smiled and said, Senior, please look. This is a mountain range. Our Xingyue Palace calls this mountain range Floating Wave Mountain Range. There are countless palaces built on it. These palaces also have a name, Lost Star Palace. Every palace in this Lost Star Palace is as big as the space fragment we encountered earlier. We just need to get close to the mountain range and find any palace. Oh. Xiao Hua raised his eyes to look at the seemingly right but actually wrong mountain range, and casually replied. Then, he turned his head to look behind him. Sure enough, the place behind him was a stretch of darkness, and the meteor belt from before had already disappeared. There was an indescribable heaviness in this darkness. Wherever one's gaze fell, it was as if they would sink into it. The mountain range seemed to be right in front of them, but Xiao Hua and the others flew for a full hour and still did not see the promised palace. Xiao Hua tried again with his divine consciousness, but it still could not reach far. He was a little impatient. After all, he had an appointment with Su Ji. He could not be sure that the place he and Zhu Qing came to was the same as Su Ji's. He unconsciously stopped. Senior. Zhu Qing noticed that Xiao Hua had stopped and immediately stopped as well. He asked, Is something the matter? This Xiao has an agreement with your palace lord. This Xiao will not go to the palace in front. Xiao Hua said with a smile. This Xiao hopes that you will have a good opportunity. Zhu Qing was a little disappointed, but he still said respectfully, Lord Palace Lord's matter is more important. Senior had better hurry and meet up with Lord Palace Lord. Junior's matter is nothing. If there is no opportunity this time, there will be another chance next time. Senior. The Zhaixing Lu disciples beside him were also disappointed. They hurriedly said, Floating Wave Mountain Range may not be far ahead. If we want to enter Floating Wave Mountain Range, we have to pass through the strange beast enclosure. Junior's strength is limited. If we encounter the strange beasts in the strange beast enclosure, our lives will be in danger. Senior, please take pity on us and send us there. Everyone, Xueqi hurriedly said, Senior Xiao is still in a hurry to help Lord Palace Lord. We can't waste any more time here. Senior Xiao, since we are already so close, there is actually no need to waste any more time. These disciples seemed to know that Xiaohua was soft-hearted and ignored Xueqi. They spoke pitifully to Xiaohua. Chapter 45-39. Xiaohua thought for a moment, then asked Xueqi, How far is it from here to the Floating Wave Mountain Range? Xueqi hesitated for a moment, then said, I'm not sure. But according to the palace master, it takes at least an hour to reach the Floating Wave Mountain Range from the meteor belt. The specific situation depends on the location of the meteor belt. Xiaohua nodded and took out his astrolabe again. Unfortunately, he still couldn't activate it and couldn't determine the direction of Xueqi, Fairy Xingyu, and the others. Xiaohua looked at the Floating Wave Mountain Range, then looked behind him and asked, Xueqi, other than the Floating Wave Mountain Range, where else do you know? I don't know. Xueqi shook his head. What about you? Xiaohua asked the others. Like Xueqi, they only knew about the Lost Star Palace. Forget it. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, Since I can't contact your palace master, I can only go to the Lost Star Palace first. Hearing Xiaohua's decision, not to mention the disciples of Zhai Xinglu, even Xueqi was happy. Who didn't want a Mahayana cultivator by their side? Everyone bowed and said, Thank you, seniors. Now that he knew the direction and that there was a strange beast circle ahead, Xiaohua naturally flew at the front and was on high alert. However, after flying for a while, more and more disciples of Zhai Xinglu gathered from all directions. There was only darkness and a kind of desolate coldness. There was no strange beast circle like Xueqi and the others had mentioned, nor was there any mysterious restriction like Xueqi had mentioned. However, looking at the moving mountain range in the distance, Xiaohua's heart gradually grew heavy because a very strange feeling came from the darkness. This feeling was like a big hand was constantly moving around Xiaohua, causing Xiaohua's senses to constantly float, making it hard for him to control himself. Roar! 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 Suddenly, the silent darkness began to produce the roars of beasts. With the roars, the darkness became filled with a desolate presence. Strands of powerful presences flashed through the sky again and again. All of the sounds and auras seemed to have come from a single step, causing Xiaohua to be startled. He hurriedly released his divine sense. Unfortunately, his divine sense was only able to extend for a few dozen meters before it was suppressed by some unknown aura. Aolo, Aolo, Aolo. Just as Xiaohua was probing, from the distant darkness, came the sound of hissing and miserable shrieks, mixed with the sound of ripples and explosions. Senior, Xueqi hurriedly said in a low voice, We've already entered the beast enclosure. The palace lord once said that the beasts here are as powerful as great sages of the Yao clan. Ordinary beasts can easily kill great Yao like Tunri. She brought us through the meteor belt, which is to enter the Lost Star Palace from the other side of the exotic beast circle. We might encounter fewer exotic beasts there. As for those screams, they were probably from the greater demons of the demon race. They didn't take a detour through the meteor belt and directly entered the beast enclosure. Naturally, they had a higher chance of encountering the beasts. The old man's suggestion to us was to conceal ourselves and pass through quickly without caring about anyone else. All right, got it. Quickly hide yourselves and pass this test. Xiaohua nodded and urged them. He already had a feeling that a very strange aura had quietly formed in the surroundings. Xueqi and the others didn't dare to be negligent. They each activated their divine abilities and flew into the depths of the darkness at their fastest speed. Xiaohua tapped his glabella. As a green light flashed, his delirium breaker Dharma eye opened. However, wherever his Dharma eye looked, Xiaohua frowned again. This was because the entire darkness was filled with fine ripples. Not only did these ripples block the light in the distance, but they also made Xiaohua's Dharma eye feel dizzy. This was something Xiaohua had never encountered before. At this moment, a hair-raising aura suddenly appeared out of thin air and swept past a few hundred meters to Xiaohua's right. Xiaohua hurriedly turned his head, but his Dharma eye didn't see anything special in that direction. Ah! Immediately after, a miserable shriek came from where the aura landed. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly closed his dizzy Dharma eye and swept it with his naked eye. He saw a Zhaixing Lu disciple's body being torn into several pieces, blood and flesh splattering all over the ground. What kind of invisible strange beast is this? Xiaohua turned pale with fright and tensed up in confusion. It's actually so powerful? Even my Dharma eye can't see it? Seeing that the strange beast was so powerful, Xiaohua's figure shrank rapidly. He raised his hands slightly and released his divine consciousness as much as possible. The other Zhaixing Lu disciples, such as Zhu Qing, fled in panic, not daring to stay for even a moment. Ah! Ah! Immediately after, several miserable shrieks sounded from the darkness in the distance. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly flew up and grabbed at the direction of the shrieks with both hands. Boom! Layers of strange golden ripples appeared in the space about 10,000 feet to the left. These ripples were like two large hands, but they were separated from each other. Moreover, each layer produced several layers of illusory images. Although the entire space was controlled by Xiaohua's transcendence energy, Xiaohua keenly sensed that between these illusory images, there were even more overlapping layers of space. His transcendence energy couldn't control these spaces. Looking at the place where Xiaohua's large hands passed by, the corpses of 4 human cultivators and a demon were revealed. They had long been split into several pieces. However, in a moment, within the space that Xiaohua had confined, there was no trace of the strange beast at all. Xiaohua's eyes turned rapidly. A layer of cold sweat formed on his back. This strange beast was really too strange. It was also at this moment that Xiaohua's figure flew past that a faint illusory image flashed past. If Xiaohua hadn't released his divine consciousness to the limit and carefully scanned the surroundings, he wouldn't have discovered it. Xiaohua was surprised. What kind of illusory image is this? Looking at its position, it seems to be where the Zhaixing Lu disciple died. Could it be the soul of that disciple? Thinking of this, Xiaohua urged his figure to go to that place to investigate. Ah! Ah! Another wave of beastly roars of the demon being killed. Xiaohua couldn't help but raise his head slightly and look in the direction of the sound. Swoosh! A strange aura, like several gusts of wind, sprayed out from a huge beast's mouth and appeared near Xiaohua. Once Xiaohua sensed it, his figure moved and used the wind escape technique. Several layers of illusory images flashed past in an attempt to evade. Unfortunately, Xiaohua had only just moved his figure. Ka ka ka. In the void that was almost sticking to Xiaohua's body, a dozen invisible forces suddenly appeared and struck Xiaohua's back. A metallic sound rang out from the surface of Xiaohua's body, and a series of sparks flew up. Damn it! Xiaohua was very cautious, but he was still attacked by a strange beast. He couldn't help but be enraged. He cursed angrily, and his right hand struck the void with a boom. The place where his fist landed immediately shattered the space within a radius of several feet. As the space collapsed and revealed itself, Xiaohua's fist also pierced the void. However, the strange thing happened again. There was nothing in the void at all. Those dozens of murderous forces seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The invisible strange beast was still invisible. Xiaohua's attack actually missed. Xiaohua was helpless. How could Zhu Qing and the other Zhaixinglu disciples be a match for a strange beast that even he couldn't kill? It was no wonder that Fairy Xingyu had warned Zhu Qing and the others not to care about others as long as they hid and escaped. However, seeing that the strange beast was unable to break through the surface of his body, Xiaohua was relieved. He pondered for a moment, then his figure flashed, and he chased in the direction that Zhu Qing and the others had flown. At this moment, roar, roar. Waves of blood-curdling screams sounded in the distance and not too far away, just as Xiaohua had flown 100 zhang away. Aolo. Behind Xiaohua, where he had just been ambushed, a dozen indistinct shadows with sharp barbs flashed past. Immediately after, a series of extremely long and miserable screams resounded from behind the shadows. Xiaohua, who was already prepared, immediately flew backward and reappeared in the space where he had just been standing. At this moment, Xiaohua clearly saw that behind where he had just been standing, a phantom several hundred feet in size flashed past in the space. Some parts of the phantom were folded, and some parts were disjointed. The phantom also had dozens of crab claws that twisted and danced. Of course, just as the phantom danced, a huge fist with golden light hit the center of the phantom. The phantom was immediately smashed to smithereens the moment it came into contact with the golden light. However, the smithereens flashed in the light of the void and could no longer be seen clearly. Isn't this the punch that this Xiao had just sent into the void? I clearly didn't hit the strange beast. Why did it only appear now? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. This Xiao understands. The space that Xiaohua was in was different from the space that the strange beast caller was in. No, it wasn't that the space was different. It was that the space was the same, but the time was different. Of course, the space at different times should also be different. The strange beast's space seemed to be slower than this Xiao's space. When the strange beast saw this Xiao, it immediately attacked. The strange beast's attack passed through an unknown space and hit this Xiao. This attack obviously wasn't in this Xiao's space, so this Xiao didn't have any time to dodge. This Xiao's physical body is strong, but the other disciples aren't. They were all killed. This Xiao immediately counterattacked. This Xiao's fist passed through an inexplicable gap in space and struck the exotic beast. Although the exotic beast was killed, there was no reaction within this Xiao's space. Only when the exotic beast's time was up did the phenomenon of the exotic beast being killed appear. It seems it doesn't seem that way. This Xiao's thoughts are contradictory. Damn this. Isn't this the law of time? This strange beast caller was too terrifying, and this ancient Star Moon Palace was too strange. This Star Moon Palace is an ancient ruin. Chapter 45-40. Thinking of this, Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization.
No.
Fairy Xingyu is wrong. The Star Moon Palace is not an ancient relic. If the Star Moon Palace was an ancient relic, how could the Yiqiong heavenly mansion of the immortal world be in the meteor belt? The Star Moon Palace must have another origin. The Star Moon Palace is probably not an ancient relic as Fairy Xingyu guessed. Oh, that's not right either. Since the Star Moon Palace has the law of time, it might be entangled with the ancient times. It's not strange that the Yiqiong heavenly mansion fell into the meteor belt with the ancient 10,000 demon realm fragment, right? Forget it.
Xiaohua was helpless in the end.
As he flew, he thought, I've only comprehended some time fragments and haven't even comprehended the spatial laws. What's the use of thinking about it now? Let's go to the Lost Star Palace first. However, since I can see that there's the law of time here, how can Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu not see it? Why didn't they remind the disciples of Zhaixinglu? Thinking of this, Xiaohua laughed again. So, what if Fairy Xingyu told the disciples about the law of time? Even if she told them that the attacks of these strange beasts would come earlier than they knew, so what? They have no power to fight back at all. It's better not to tell them. Now that he knew the secret of the strange beast's attacks, Xiaohua's mind worked quickly. In this space-time, whether it was the great demons of the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm, Xueqi and the other disciples of Zhaixing Lu, or even Xiaohua himself, they had no power to fight back in the face of the strange beast's attacks from another space-time. However, Xiaohua also had a corresponding countermeasure. Of course, he could not get ahead of the law of time, nor could he change this law. However, he could warn or defend himself, Xueqi and the other disciples. Kacha. As Xiaohua waved his hands, countless crystal lights fell into the void. The power of thunder was born in the darkness, enveloping the nearby space and protecting Xueqi and the other disciples who were flying around. However, he had only just managed to protect it. Swoosh. Immediately, a strange aura appeared around several disciples. Xiaohua knew that this was the strange beasts from the strange beast pens attacking through the space-time mezzanine. He had no choice but to circulate his magic power and observe the effects of the defense. Sure enough, as soon as the aura was born, the powerful power of thunder shattered it. There were even some lightning swords piercing into the void. Of course, there was no movement. Xiaohua ignored it. He and the other disciples and continued to fly forward. As expected, after flying Yuwaiwe and the other disciples Yuwaiwe and the other disciples to the strange Yu and the other disciples Waiwe. In the next half a cup of tea's time, there were no more strange beasts causing trouble for him. Xiaohua escorted Xueqi and the other disciples safely to the so-called floating wave mountain range. As usual, Xiaohua first activated the star plate, but seeing that the star plate still didn't move, Xiaohua felt helpless. He turned to look at the floating wave mountain range. At this point, there were no longer any Zhaixing Lu disciples at the foot of the mountain range. Only the faint cries of agony and the cries of beasts could be heard in the distant darkness. He could not tell whether it was a great demon or a strange beast from the void. Xiaohua pinched his chin and looked at the vague mountain range. He opened his illusion breaker Dharma eye again. What he saw with his Dharma eye was still the same as before. There were many fine lines, and behind the fine lines was another blurry world. At this time, Xiaohua already understood. If he wasn't wrong, these lines should be the lines of the time laws. Behind these lines should be another space. A space that overlapped with the space where Xiaohua was standing. Of course, when these fine lines fell into his transcendence vision gave birth to an indescribable dizziness, and Xiaohua felt as if the world was spinning. Xiaohua didn't dare to look any longer. Just as he was about to close his Dharma eyes, he vaguely saw that in the distant space, there seemed to be some golden threads surging like water ripples. Closing his Dharma eyes, Xiaohua rested for a moment, then looked at the golden ripples. Wasn't it the shadow of the undulating mountain range? Xiaohua was already used to it. He clearly knew that in this star-moon palace, most of his common sense would be overturned. He didn't need to look for the source behind the appearance at all. He just needed to stay alive and find Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu. At this time, in the undulating darkness, another faint scream rang out, attracting Xiaohua's attention. Xiaohua was a little surprised. Xueqi and the others had said clearly that they would reach a safe zone after passing through the exotic beast enclosure. There weren't any special dangers in the floating wave mountain range. Even if there were pavilions bigger than spatial fragments, as long as they could enter, they could enter. There was no way to know what was inside the floating wave mountain range. If they couldn't enter, then they couldn't enter. It wasn't a matter of life and death. Immediately after, Xiaohua urged his body, wanting to turn into a rainbow and fly out. However, the moment he moved, a strong resistance appeared in the surrounding space, blocking Xiaohua's path. The faster Xiaohua wanted to fly, the stronger the resistance became. Xiaohua slowed down, and the resistance gradually disappeared. Interesting. Xiaohua smiled faintly and slowed down his flying speed, flying towards the source of the scream. However, he saw layers upon layers of mountain-like silhouettes passing under him. When Xiaohua's figure landed, the silhouette of the mountain-like silhouette was empty again, and another layer of silhouettes appeared under him. In short, Xiaohua couldn't touch the so-called floating wave mountain range at all. Could this be another mountain range in another space? Xiaohua laughed inwardly. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind like lightning. Xiaohua's smile disappeared, and he came to a sudden stop. Looking at the mountain range in the distance, the mountain-like rocks under him, and the invisible exotic beast enclosure behind him, he cried out involuntarily, "Damn it, I understand now. Why can't I increase my flying speed in this space?" That's because there's another space outside this space. The same place has two different times, and the only way to pass through these two spaces is to increase my flying speed. In other words, the obstruction the Xiao encountered when he was flying wasn't some kind of restrictive force, but the power of time. If my flying speed reaches a certain level, I'll be able to break through this obstruction, and I'll definitely reach the other space. Thinking of this, Xiaohua thought of his own light escape technique. Similarly, if this Xiao wants to practice the light escape technique, he'll inevitably encounter a spatial barrier in an ordinary space. If this Xiao's flying speed is faster, I'll be able to break through this spatial barrier. Then isn't that the immortal realm? If I'm sheltered in light, I'll be an immortal. That's how it should be. With this thought, Xiaohua's heart couldn't help but be eager to give it a try. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the top of the mountain range. The true essence in his body began to slowly circulate, and layers of fine lightning appeared on the surface of his body. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, Xiaohua moved. The lightning around his body flickered, illuminating the surrounding space. As the lightning flickered, the space-time resistance immediately appeared, as if a surging wave was surging from all directions, annihilating Xiaohua's entire body. Xiaohua's body slowly moved, and 4 layers of illusory images were also slowly born. After the 4 layers of illusory images were formed, Xiaohua's body actually turned into a bolt of lightning. This bolt of lightning was first more than 10 feet long, similar to Xiaohua's height. Then, the bolt of lightning rapidly elongated, rushing forward 10 feet, then 100 feet. Simultaneously, the bolt of lightning gradually became illusory, distorted, and broke into dozens of pieces. Every piece of lightning was pulled apart like a broken lotus root, and every piece seemed to be cut off by the void, but also seemed to be connected together. In addition, the rumbling of thunder was also elongated, and it gradually penetrated deep into the void. This phenomenon only lasted for a few breaths of time before the lightning suddenly shuddered. Without any warning, the bolt of lightning crossed over 1,000 feet and condensed on the other side. At the same time, Xiaohua's body reappeared. Unlike before, Xiaohua's body had already become 132 illusory specks, and it was as if he were about to fuse into the void. Unfortunately, just as 70% of the 132 specks disappeared, the remaining 30% trembled violently, and all of the specks that had disappeared before reappeared. Xiaohua's entire body flashed like a wave of water, and he was completely revealed in midair once again. At this moment, large beads of sweat suddenly appeared on Xiaohua's forehead, and his arm, which had been raised, drooped down powerlessly. How was this the aura of a human Grand Ascension stage being? Sigh. Even though my lightning movement technique has already reached the phenomenal success stage, it's still not enough to break through the restrictions of time. The fine lines formed by time and space are even more powerful than the will of heaven and earth, and it looks like the lightning is about to break through these fine lines, but it still fell short in the end. Xiaohua sighed, but his eyes flashed like starlight again, and he thought to himself, however, compared to before, my flying speed has increased significantly. If I can obtain the final essence of water and cultivate my wind movement technique to the phenomenal success stage, I should be able to break through the restrictions of heaven and earth. However, in the instant that I broke through space, I seem to have seen waves, right? Could it be that this star-moon palace is a reef in another space? Xiaohua came to a sudden realization. Could it be that this star-moon palace is an immortal abode that opened up at the bottom of the sea? Ha ha ha, things in this world are really strange. Xiaohua shook his head, and once again, he slowly moved his body and laughed. If it was a disciple of Zhaixing Lu like Xueqi, he would probably never have imagined that this star-moon palace is actually something similar to an immortal abode in another space, at the bottom of the sea. Chapter 45-41. Although Xiaohua had yet to fly up the floating wave mountain range and see the so-called Lost Star Palace, everything he had encountered since the meteor had already given him a bountiful harvest. It was much more useful than traveling. When Xiaohua flew out of the silhouette of the mountain range and arrived in the sky where he could see all the mountains, Xiaohua smiled again. This was because the peak of the mountain range was not the peak of the mountain but a wave-like hill. It was similar to the ripples he saw in the other space. However, the surging waves were frozen here, and there were countless palaces on top of the frozen ripple mountain range. In fact, instead of palaces, it would be better to call them reefs of different shapes. These palaces were not built together, but scattered on the mountain peak. Each palace had a different appearance, and they did not even have the outline of a palace. Apart from the various colors of light that seeped out from the protrusions and depressions of these palaces, they were really not much different from reefs. There's no need to say more, Xiaohua said helplessly. Since Fairy Xingyu called this star-moon palace, she would naturally call this ugly reef a star palace. And I'm afraid she also felt that calling this ugly thing a star palace was a little far-fetched, so she called it Lost Star. Haha, a Lost Star Palace. This reef looks like he's trying to be cultured. As he spoke, Xiaohua's gaze fell on a spot on the mountain peak. There was the corpse of a fat monk lying there. Wasn't this the body that the Grand Mist ancestor had occupied earlier? At this time, the left arm of the corpse was gone, and the other parts were slowly melting away. Hee, so the Grand Mist ancestor is also here. Xiaohua immediately understood when he saw the body and said with a smile, I think with his ability, he won't die here. If I'm not wrong, he must have obtained the strange beast collar through other means. Moreover, when he arrived here, his body was severely damaged, so he had no choice but to attack other cultivators and occupy their bodies. However, I don't know which star palace he wants to go to. What kind of conspiracy does he have? While Xiaohua was pondering, the body that the Grand Mist ancestor had occupied earlier slowly disappeared. It was unknown whether it had fallen into another space or was being corroded away. In any case, Xiaohua didn't dare to reach out and touch it. Xiaohua's gaze swept across the area. There were a few star palaces in the distance, but he couldn't see anything special about any of them. He also didn't know which star palace the Grand Mist ancestor would go to. Xiaohua only paused for a moment, then casually flew in a direction. When he passed by a few star palaces, he casually landed in one of them. Just as he was about to approach the star palace, he saw that there were circles of distortions outside the star palace. These distortions formed a crooked, and there were even some mottled and empty vortexes in the middle. A faintly discernible suction force and resplendent starlight were born from the vortexes. Xiaohua did not even think, and his body flickered with a protective golden light as he fell into the vortexes. At the same time Xiaohua's figure landed in the star palace, the star palace beside him began to tremble violently. As it trembled, the entire star palace gradually twisted together like a fried dough twist. Then, circles of fluctuations rushed into the sky. The shadows within several hundred li of Xiaohua suddenly lit up. This light was similarly distorted, broken, and mottled. After a few flashes of light, with a swish sound, it fell and covered the star palace. The light was like a star. It first floated outside the star palace, then seeped into the star palace, and disappeared in an instant. The light was like a pillar, and it mainly covered the star palace. The star palace that Xiaohua had landed in, and the few star palaces to his left, also had light floating down. The interior of the Star Palace was an almost empty space. The sky was filled with mottled specks of light that had yet to take shape. On the ground, there were layers of solidified magma shadows. It was a pity that the magma did not have any heat. Although there was a lot of fiery red light flashing on the surface of the magma, they were all shadows, as if they were drawn in the void. In the middle of the sky and the earth, there was a man of ordinary build. If this man had one black and one white eye dug out, even if he was thrown into a crowd, no one would notice. However, because of these two eyes, he was no longer himself. He was the Grand Mist Ancestor. The man let out a self-righteous chuckle. It's really here. This star palace that was born when the Grand Mist Ancestor was born, and heaven and earth had yet to form. This is where I condensed my body and was reborn. Motherfucker, I've been hiding for so long. Isn't it all for this day? Gauchen, Virokana, golden-winged great prune, do you think I'm afraid of you? I just don't have a physical body, so I can't unleash my abilities. And that's Xueqi. Do you think you're strong just because you're a Mahayana realm expert? After we leave the Star Moon Palace, I'll let you know who the #1 expert of the Tao Gate is. Your soaring Dragon Mountain Range, your Fortune Gate's disciples, you'd better obediently hand them over to me. Otherwise, I won't hesitate to kill you. After he finished speaking, the Grand Mist Ancestor threw his head back and laughed. His laughter reverberated through the entire space. As the Grand Mist Ancestor's laughter resounded, the space around him started to collapse, and the collapse rapidly spread through the entire space. Kacha, streaks of blood appeared on the man's face. Following that, the man's scholarly robes turned into dust, and thumb-sized cracks appeared on his naked body. The cracks were so deep that they reached his bones. Boom! Black and white clouds appeared above the man's head and below his feet, and they converged in the middle. The man's body turned into dust with a loud bang. Such a weak body can't even withstand a single blow. If it wasn't for the fact that this old man had a fortuitous encounter in the Star Palace and obtained the method to condense a body from the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook, even if this old man was immortal, I'm afraid I wouldn't have the chance to rise again. Boom! Another thunderous boom rang out, and the black and white clouds finally collided. At the center of the clouds, a picturesque thing appeared. There seemed to be many drawings on it, and it also seemed to be blank. An indescribable light shone down from the sky, and tens of thousands of cryptic runes appeared on the picture. The runes were reflected in the light, and they turned into primal chaos phenomena, primordial chaos phenomena, desolate desolation phenomena, humanistic phenomena, and so on. The runes only floated up a few feet before they suddenly descended. The picture quickly condensed, and in a few breaths' time, a black and white human figure appeared where the picture had disappeared. Although the human figure was black and white, the black and white were mixed with the cryptic runes from before. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Just as the humanoid figure was formed, the space around it began to slice apart. Pieces of snowflake-like brilliance fell into the humanoid figure's body. The center of the humanoid figure gradually began to light up. When the humanoid figure was completely transparent, the black and white clouds began to churn. The white clouds gradually condensed into a green seal character, which was the word heaven. The black clouds also condensed into another green seal character, which was the word earth. As the two green seal characters appeared, the entire space fell silent. Two terrifying auras appeared out of nowhere, and they fell into the two words through space. Then, the chanting of gods and ghosts gradually filled the entire space. As the two terrifying auras fell, the transparent human figure in the center also gradually turned into a green seal character, which was the word human. When the word human appeared, it immediately stood tall and connected with the two green seal characters, heaven and earth. Boom! When the word human connected heaven and earth, the two terrifying auras also tangled together. The entire space trembled and rumbled, as if it couldn't bear the burden. Then, layers of spirals appeared in the space, tangling together from top to bottom. In just a moment, Countless moonlight from outer space fell from the sky, falling into the white clouds of the word heaven. At the same time, the power of the stars from the other heavens also rushed out, falling into the black clouds of the word earth. Then, the power of the stars and the moon rushed into the word human in the center. Ka 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 ka. The strange black and white lightning was wreaking havoc in the entire space. Every time the lightning flashed, the space would tremble and the human character would grow in size. After a total of 81 times, the human character had grown to a size of 10,000 feet. Roar. The word heaven and the word earth let out a roar that had never appeared in the mortal world. The two terrifying auras disappeared like the tide, and then the two clouds of mist fell on the top and bottom of the word human. Kacha. The clouds of mist disappeared, and the lightning above the word human also retracted. When the green seal character shattered, a 1,000 feet tall human figure appeared in the air. The human-shaped heavenly court was full and round, and its two pairs of thick eyebrows were like two flying swords. One of its eyes was slightly black, while the other was slightly white. However, when its gaze flashed past, an aura that could shake the world involuntarily appeared. Under the eyes, the nose was like a hanging gallbladder, and a dignified feeling was easily revealed. However, under his nose, his lips were too thin. The arrogance and sneer at the corners of his mouth all revealed ruthlessness and sneers, heartless and unrighteous.
Ha ha ha.
The human figure raised its head and laughed. It was the voice of the Grand Mist Ancestor. I finally succeeded in condensing my body. The Grand Mist Ancestor laughed for a long time, then looked down at his hands, feet, and body. A satisfied smile appeared on his face, and he whispered, "Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook was right. A body formed with the help of the power of the stars is not an ordinary body, but the Xiantian Dao body. With this Xiantian Dao body, it is easier for me to communicate with heaven and earth. The origin energy of heaven and earth that ordinary people can't sense is a part of my Dao body. I can absorb the origin energy of heaven and earth as my own without refining it. In this way, even a dying child can cultivate to the nascent soul stage extremely quickly. As for me, my Dao foundation was formed long ago, and I just used this body to cultivate again. There are no bottlenecks in the cultivation process, and I only need to use the Dao pills that I have prepared long ago to return to the Mahayana stage. Ha ha ha. This Xiantian Dao body is not only the body of the human race, but also the body of the demon race. I don't need to refine it too much, and it is comparable to the body of a great demon, or even a demon king. If I refine it for tens of thousands of years, I may not be inferior to the great sages of the Great Sage Hall. With such a foundation, it will be easy for me to control all the Dao sects in the world, and the revival of the Dao sects is just around the corner. Chapter 45-42. At this point, this old man's trip to the Xingyue Palace is complete. As he spoke, a trace of regret appeared on the Grand Mist Ancestor's face. However, there was also pride in his regret. He thought to himself, however, most things in the world can't go as one wishes. Due to my lack of strength, I still couldn't refine the yin-yang illustration to the extreme. It was difficult for me to reach the yin-yang stage. Otherwise, the yin-yang illustration wouldn't just be the heaven-earth profound realm, but the yin-yang primordial realm. If that was the case, this old man would be able to control fate and reverse yin and yang. I would be able to condense an immortal spiritual body and ascend. As he spoke, the Grand Mist Ancestor opened his mouth and spat out a ray of clear light. Within the clear light, a palm-sized flag appeared. The flag was multicolored, and its design was very strange. What was special about it was that there were many strange beasts embroidered on it. The flag flashed in the clear light, and the beasts flew out again. They turned into powerful shadows and circled around the Grand Mist Ancestor. Haha, everyone knows that this old man has the yin-yang illustration. who knows that this old man has the 100 Beasts flag. After this old man successfully refines these treasures, I will have the help of several hundred monster beasts with cultivation similar to this old man's. Let alone the human race, even the great sacred hall, will not be my match. With these 2 treasures, who in the 3 continents will be my match? Who can compare with my good fortune? The Grand Mist ancestor laughed loudly and didn't retract his 1,000 feet Xiantian Dao physique. Instead, he formed seals with both hands and started to cultivate. Endless amounts of star energy and heaven-earth yuan qi rushed into his body. Foundation establishment, enlightening, fusion, heartbeat, solitary spirit, golden core, nascent soul, astral projection, spirit severing, and other realms appeared on the Grand Mist ancestor's Dao physique like blooming flowers. The pressure shook the entire space as it gradually approached the fusion, tribulation transcendence, and Mahayana realm. Xiaohua naturally didn't know that the Grand Mist ancestor was in the Star Palace next to him. The Grand Mist ancestor had already condensed his body, and his strength was approaching Xiaohua's. In the future, Xiaohua would have to face an opponent who was not only strong but also full of schemes. He only stood in the other Star Palace in a daze. The Star Palace Xiaohua had entered was different from the space Grand Mist ancestor had entered. Xiaohua was facing an enormous mountain peak. This mountain peak had many protrusions from top to bottom, and it looked as if there were thorns growing on the mountain peak. Moreover, there was an extremely dense heaven-earth yuan qi in the space, and even a trace of thin immortal qi. Looking at the peak of the mountain, there was also a small platform with a black box on it. The box was about 4 feet long and looked very ordinary. There were no runes on its surface, nor were there any fluctuations. It was similar to the fist-sized box that Xiaohua had obtained in the heavenly prison. Xiaohua was currently standing in front of the box with a dazed look on his face. He had never imagined that he would encounter such a strange box the moment he entered a star palace. Xiaohua waved his hand, and the box fell into his hand. He examined it from top to bottom, and sure enough, he didn't discover anything. He then tried to send his consciousness into the space, and sure enough, he was able to connect with the space inside the Star Palace. He took out the fist-sized box and compared it with the space. Once again, he put the 2 boxes into his space. The Jade Archive Xiaohua also couldn't see through this box. This black box is too strange. Xiaohua put away the 2 boxes and pondered inwardly. It appeared twice, and both times were related to time laws. Could it be that this box contains a fragment of time? It's a pity that this Xiao doesn't know how to open this box. Right? Isn't there still Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu? When I see them later, I'll let them take a look. While Xiaohua was thinking, he saw moonlight falling from the sky, and starlight surged out from the ground. The entire space was filled with moonlight. Good. Seeing this, Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He clapped his hands and laughed. Isn't this my Fortune Gate's disciples' opportunity? Although this Star Moon Palace has time laws, there shouldn't be space fragments like the heavenly prison. Fortune Gate's disciples can't be as clever as the Xiao. Now that this space has moonlight, isn't this the perfect opportunity to temper their bodies? With this foundation, their future cultivation will be twice the result with half the effort, several times faster than ordinary cultivators. Moreover, this space's origin energy is abnormally abundant, and there's even a trace of immortal qi. Perhaps this will give them a better opportunity. While pondering, Xiaohua's consciousness entered the Shenhua continent and turned into the Jade Archive Xiaohua. He raised a finger, and this finger turned into thousands of fragments, landing on Xiongyi, Zhaixingzi, and the others' foreheads. The secret technique of absorbing moonlight to temper their bodies was already imprinted in their minds. Subsequently, Xiaohua invited all the Fortune Gate's disciples, Zhaixingzi, and the others out from the Shenhua continent. With a wave of his sleeve, everyone occupied a protrusion on the mountain peak. Xiaohua himself sat on the mountain peak, facing the sky with his palms facing the sky as he explained the secret technique's profundity word by word. As he explained, The various cultivators began to absorb the moonlight into their bodies. When he finished, Xiaohua stood up and swept his divine sense across the space. There was nothing wrong. Xiaohua smiled faintly. Looking at the moonlight that was still pouring into the space, his figure flickered, and he soared into the sky. A moment later, Xiaohua's vision blurred, and he appeared outside the Star Moon Palace. So, that's how it is. Xiaohua's gaze landed on the Grand Mist Ancestor's Star Palace, and he immediately understood what was going on. Someone must have obtained a fortuitous encounter here, and that's why the other Star Palaces are benefiting. But I wonder who that person is? Could it be? With this thought, Xiaohua's figure was about to enter the Star Palace. Unfortunately, before Xiaohua could land, a repulsive force appeared above the Star Palace, blocking Xiaohua's path. Could it be that if there's someone inside the Star Palace, other people can't enter? Xiaohua was a little confused. He looked at the nearby Star Palaces and randomly picked one to land. As expected, the space he landed in was empty, and there were no other cultivators or greater demons. When Xiaohua looked at the Star Palace again, he couldn't help but smile. With a wave of his hand, he brought Ao Sheng, Ao Zhan, and the others out from the space. Stacked Jadeite Legacy Realm? The moment Ao Sheng landed in the space, he was overjoyed. He shook his head and wagged his tail as he exclaimed. Xiaohua laughed. He pointed at the waves below his feet and asked, "Is there seawater in your stacked Jadeite Legacy Realm?" Haha, I don't care. Ao Sheng looked at the rich power of the stars and moon, as well as the faint dragon chi. He immediately activated the Dragon Island's secret technique, and his entire dragon body was covered in dragon marks. Thank you, Senior. Ao Zhan and the others did not dare to delay and hurriedly began to cultivate. Xiaohua waited for a moment, and when he saw that they did not occupy much space, he summoned some of Jiang Hong's descendants from the Shenhua continent and instructed them to cultivate here. Then, Xiaohua flew out again and landed in the nearby Star Palaces. Except for one Star Palace that could not be entered, the other 4 Star Palaces were empty. These 4 Star Palaces were either a snowy land, a grassland, a demon territory, or a starry sky. Apart from the unusually rich power of the stars and moon, they also had their own unique characteristics. There were even places where the qi of righteousness was strange. Therefore, Xiaohua released Xiaohuang, Xiaohe, Gongshu, Yisin, Mo Jianli, and the others from Shenhua continent. With them here, other cultivators could not enter. After the Star Moon Palace closed, they would be safely evacuated by the Star Moon Palace. There would be no threat to their lives. The only thing that Xiaohua was worried about was that the Star Moon Palace would push these disciples to various places in the 3 continents. No one knew what dangers they would encounter in the 3 continents. However, this was no longer something that Xiaohua could control. These disciples could not cultivate under his wings for the rest of their lives. Phew! When he came out of the last Star Palace, Xiaohua let out a long sigh. He thought with a smile, "Fortunately, I have completed one of the 2 missions in the Star Moon Palace. Now there is only the matter of Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue left." Thinking of this, Xiaohua took out the astrolabe out of habit. A thunderbolt landed on the astrolabe. Xiaohua didn't have much hope at first, because he had already tried before. However, what surprised him was that where the lightning landed, the astrolabe flickered and actually disappeared into thin air, turning into an arrow and of light that landed on his right hand. Oh. Xiaohua looked at the light spot, then at the arrow, and then at the Star Palace. He nodded thoughtfully. It seems that the astrolabe can only be activated because this Star Palace has attracted the power of the stars and moon to break the restriction this time. This light spot should be where Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue are. This arrow is flying in the direction of Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue. Then, Xiaohua did not dare to delay. He urged his body to fly in the direction of the arrow. Contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, the arrow was not pointing in the direction that Xiaohua had come from. Instead, it was pointing in the depths of the floating wave mountain range. Xiaohua flew for a full hour. Not only did the reef-like star palace disappear, but the wave-like mountain peak also disappeared. A plane appeared in front of Xiaohua. Xiaohua stood at the edge of the mountain peak, hesitating. This plane did not look very big. It was like a public square. The public square was filled with indescribable light and shadows. These light and shadows looked like palaces, mountains, and even strange beasts. However, when Xiaohua's gaze landed on the dusky plain, he discovered something strange about it. This was because the plain was almost boundless. His gaze seemed to fall into a pitch-black, deathly stillness, and he could not see the end. Moreover, a hair-raising feeling involuntarily arose in Xiaohua's heart. Xiaohua looked at his right hand. The light spot on it was a little weak, but the arrow was not wrong. It was pointing at the light and shadow on the other side of the plain. Needless to say, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue were definitely in that light and shadow. At this moment, Xiaohua had no other choice. Xiaohua cautiously opened his Dharma eye with difficulty. However, after seeing an even denser patch of fine lines, there was actually a blank space. There was nothing. This is a little troublesome. Xiaohua closed his Dharma eye and pinched his chin. He looked at the plain, which was even more terrifying than the strange beast circle, and thought to himself, I wonder what's so strange about this plain. It was also at this moment that a few faint whistling sounds came from the distance. Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and saw a few black figures flying over from another direction. It seemed to be from the side of the fallen star palace. Xiaohua's divine sense could not go very far, and his vision could not see clearly. Chapter 45-43. After a while, the black figures were revealed. They were 4 demons and 2 humans. These demons and humans were obviously working together, and they were heading in a different direction from Xiaohua. However, when they saw Xiaohua from afar, they immediately flew over. When the human cultivator saw Xiaohua's appearance, he couldn't help but exclaim, Xiao. Master Xiao? Xiaohua looked at this person and didn't have any special impression. He already knew that this was the human cultivator who saw him outside the Star Moon Palace. Yes, it's me. Xiaohua nodded slightly. The human cultivator in front was a nascent soul cultivator of the Dao sect. He stopped and bowed. Junior is Chen Cheng, a Dao sect cultivator from Jing Province's Dry Feather Manor. Greetings, Senior Xiao. Then, the other Dao sect master of the 5th level hurriedly said respectfully, Junior is Ma Miaoka of Jing Province's Ma family. Greetings, Senior Xiao. He rise. Seeing a Dao sect cultivator and a Confucian cultivator working together, he was happy and raised his hand to signal the 2 to rise. After the 2 humans, there were naturally 4 demons. Among the 4 demons, one looked like a fire stork, one looked like a green leopard, one looked like a flying tiger, and one looked like a fox. However, these 4 demons were much stronger than the 2 humans. Other than the green leopard, who was close to the sun-devouring realm, the other 3 were in the star-plucking realm. The 4 demons were hesitant. After all, they didn't know Xiaohua's temper. However, when Xiaohua looked at them, the smile on Xiaohua's face wasn't as distant as they feared. The 4 demons were overjoyed and hurriedly went forward to greet and introduce themselves. Xiaohua helped them up one by one and said with a smile, Where are you going? Senior, please no. We want to find a chance to pass through this ghost plane and head to the resplendent sea of stars. Ma Miaoka hurriedly replied, But we've been looking for a long time and haven't seen a good opportunity. Moreover, when we passed through the strange beast circle, the cultivators who came with us all died. Only the 4 of us are left. Ghost plains? Xiaohua immediately understood when he heard this. This must be the place with the inexplicable restriction that Xueqi had mentioned. However, listening to Ma Miaoka's words, he seemed to want to travel with Xiaohua. Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked, Why are you heading to the resplendent sea of stars? Isn't there a lot of opportunities in the Lost Star Palace? Senior. Chun Chung hurriedly smiled and said, although the Lost Star Palace is beneficial to the cultivation of the human race, there are not many opportunities for the monster race. Before we entered the Star Moon Palace, we had already discussed with these immortal friends of the Thousand Demons' sacred realm that we would head to the resplendent sea of stars together. Moreover, many fellow immortals have contributed a lot in the beast enclosure. We can't go back on our word. So it's like that. Xiaohua thought for a moment and nodded. It's great that you all can keep your promise. But this is also my first time in Star Moon Palace. Although I have discussed with Star Moon Palace Master about the matters after entering Star Moon Palace, I have no idea how to pass through Ghost Plain. To tell you the truth, I didn't even know this place was called Ghost Plain before I met you. So, I don't have any special methods to guarantee that I can pass through this Ghost Plain. Xiaohua's words could not be ignored by these humans and monsters. But whether they believed him or not was not something Xiaohua could know. The fox smiled faintly and said, Senior Xiao, you are a Mahayana stage human and a supreme being in Star Moon Palace. This Ghost Plain is a land of death for us, but for Senior, it's just a plain. We sincerely hope that Senior can help us pass through this land of death. We will never forget Senior's kindness.
Sigh.
Xiaohua sighed helplessly. Even the law enforcers of the immortal realm weren't confident that they could pass through Ghost Plain. How could Xiaohua, a Mahayana stage human, make such a promise? However, Xiaohua didn't refuse. His gaze swept across the 4 demon clan members as he nodded and said, I'm also going to pass through this so-called Ghost Plain to head to the resplendent sea of stars. Since we've met, it's fate. I'm willing to take all of you through this Ghost Plain. When the 4 demons and 2 humans heard this, they were overjoyed. Just as they were about to bow, Xiaohua waved his hand again and stopped the 6 of them from bowing. He did not hide his attitude and continued, however, I want to make things clear. There seems to be a restriction set up in the void above the Ghost Plains. Anyone who encounters this attack seems to have no chance of escaping. The Palace Master of the Star Moon Palace has personally witnessed 4 demons of the sun-devouring realm being instantly annihilated by this restriction. I have no confidence in being able to evade this restriction, nor do I have any confidence in being able to help you if you encounter this restriction. Of course, rest assured, if I discover anything, I'll be sure to notify you. Of course, juniors believe in senior. The 2 humans and 6 demons hurriedly nodded their heads and answered with joy. They didn't believe that Xiaohua could pass through the Ghost Plains without using any magical ability to break through the restrictions. Of course, even if Xiaohua didn't have any special magical ability, having such a supreme cultivator of the 3 continents by his side was still better than risking their lives to pass through. First, tell me what kind of opportunity you are looking for. Xiaohua declined to comment and asked again. Chun Chung hurriedly replied, according to the seniors who've been to the Star Moon Palace before, although Ghost Plain is extremely long and almost boundless, there are more opportunities when you're about 40% of the distance from Floating Wave Mountain Range. Furthermore, when passing through Ghost Plain and encountering the restriction, the opportunity will appear. As long as you're not killed by the restriction, you can be transported to the resplendent sea of stars. How far is this place from your ideal location? Xiaohua nodded and asked. About half a meal's time. Chun Chung hurriedly replied. Xiaohua smiled. Lead the ways. Yes, senior. Chun Chung glanced at Ma Miaoka and respectfully replied. The 2 of them flew in front to accompany Xiaohua, while the 4 demons tactfully followed behind. It seemed that the secret of passing through Ghost Plain was already a well-known secret. After flying for half a meal's time, another 10 demons and 4 Confucian cultivators flew over from other directions. There were even dozens of greater demons waiting at the edge of Floating Wave Mountain Range. Seeing Xiaohua, a Grand Ascension stage human, arrive, all the demons were pleasantly surprised and came over to greet him. Xiaohua had no choice but to raise his hand and help the demons up, saying, There's no need for formalities. This is my first time here, so I don't know much about Ghost Plane. What plans did you all have before? What plans do you all have now? Just take this old man into consideration. Yes, senior. When the few great Yaos heard that, they became even happier. After all, they had already discussed this before entering the Star Moon Palace. Now that Xiaohua had suddenly appeared, their plans had been disrupted. If Xiaohua were to continue acting on his own, who would dare to disobey him? In that case, all of their previous arrangements would be for naught. Thus, the human cultivators chatted with Xiaohua while the sharp-looking greater demons, including that fox, gathered together to discuss and wait. After another incense stick's worth of time, just as Xiaohua was starting to get impatient, another dozen greater demons flew over. These greater demons were all injured and appeared to be in quite a sorry state. When they saw Xiaohua, they were also surprised and hurriedly extended respectful greetings. Xiaohua waved a hand, indicating for them to meet up with the other greater demons. Meanwhile, he turned his gaze toward Ghost Plane, which was beginning to glow. Moments later, 3 greater demons came over and respectfully said, "Senior, we can enter the plane now." "All right." Xiaohua nodded. "Do you want me to go in first?" The greater demon nodded with an awkward expression. "Yes, Senior is a Grand Ascension stage human. Humph, how can that be?" A great grandmaster at the side hurriedly snorted and said, "Before we arrived at the Star Moon Palace, we had already discussed this. Your demon clan's demon body is the strongest. The one in front should be your demon clan's great demon swallowing Sunday. How can we let a Grand Ascension stage senior lead the way? He should be walking in the middle." This Sun Devourer stuttered and replied, "Didn't Senior Xiao say?" Before the greater demon could finish his sentence, another fox interjected. "During our discussion, we also made it clear that we should put the most powerful and confident ones in the front. Senior Xiao is the most powerful, so we naturally have to ask him to walk in the front and protect us. No, we don't agree." Another scholarly cultivator also yelled. Xiaohua smiled. He was naturally aware that whoever was arranged to walk in the front and who was arranged to walk in the back would be a competition between the human race and the demon race. Under normal circumstances, Xiaohua would most likely listen to the scholarly cultivators and walk in the middle. At the very least, he wouldn't walk in the front. However, he also understood that in this Ghost Plains, where even Su Ji wasn't confident, luck was the most important factor, so there was no difference between walking in the front and walking in the back. Furthermore, he had already said that he would listen to their arrangements, so he naturally couldn't go back on his word. However, Xiaohua was still a little perplexed. If they wanted him to take care of the demon race and the human race, then he should be in the middle. If he was arranged to walk in the front, then he wouldn't be able to take care of too many demon race beings. Could it be that these demon race beings have some other plan? Xiaohua's brows furrowed as he thought to himself, would they have the guts to do something like this? However, after Xiaohua landed on the plains, he began to understand what was going on. This plains was extremely strange. Not only was he unable to release his spiritual sense, but he also couldn't use his spiritual sense to probe the surrounding space. Even his gaze was pitch black, and he couldn't see the faint starlight up ahead. It was as if there was no end to this ghost plains. Under such circumstances, even if he was at the center, he most likely wouldn't be able to take care of too many demon race beings. As such, it was best for him to lead the way. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.